Oh, yes, sir. Oh, no, you're good. Welcome into the NBA Deeper Dive as we get you ready for tonight's 8-game slate, courtesy here of Prize Picks. Tonight we have the Deeper Dive and then a juicy extended live before lock. But right now, for the next hour, myself and more importantly, Mr. Moneymaker out there, Steve Buzzard in the house. Mike Awesemo is producing. We ask you, as you're already stacked up here, ready and raving to go, hit that thumbs up button. Please make sure you're subscribed. We'll tell you about that promo code Awesemo Match 100 in Prize Picks in a second. Steve, my man, always a pleasure and looking forward to winning some money. I have my pen and paper ready to go, brother.
Yeah, let's get after it. I need to make back some money after the last 2 games. A really hot start to the week, but the last 2 days have kind of gone south pretty quickly. So ready to get right back after it and try to remember that winning feeling. So
you get caught chasing?
Oh, go ahead.
You get caught chasing?
No, I think I'm pretty good at my bankroll management strategy right now, but it's just the way that DFS goes. Sometimes you have a hot streak, sometimes you have a cold streak. And, I think the best thing about DFS is there's always another slate. So we can get after it.
Keep firing, as they say in the betting world, my friend. So let's look at this. We've got 8 games. We're dealing with injury. We're dealing with game time decisions as well. So as always in the deeper dive, we'll look game by game. But in the backdrop, there's always the injury factor, trying to get late news as far as starting lineups, factoring into what we're looking at. Overall, how are you looking and approaching the site? We're going to hit on Yahoo, FanDuel, as well as DK. But what really jumps out, I think, from an overall standpoint tonight?
Yeah, so we talked the last couple of times of these shows I've done is that we got to really pay attention for late swap because there was a lot of news coming. I think that's a little bit less so the case today. A lot of the news there is actually still a lot of news outstanding that we'll talk about, but the majority of it are on the 7 o'clock Eastern time games. So we should know the information by lock. And also, a lot of the late night hammers are fairly weak tonight as well. So we'll talk about that also. But I think if you have an early lead tonight, you may not get passed by as many people at the end. At least that's the way I'm hoping, because that's probably the way I'm going to be building my lineups, especially if some of the news shakes out the way that we might be expecting.
So if you're building larger amounts of lineups, are you looking to get to maybe a smaller percentage to counter that, where you're right, the late night hammer doesn't look like it's going to provide much, but as we know, and as you know better than many here, if not most, sometimes it's just countering what everybody's thinking and going the opposite way. And it may only be like 10% of 150 plus lineups that you would even apply to that, but is that something you would do if you're building more lineups?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is certainly a reasonable approach, and we'll see if there are some of those guys. That there are a couple of them in those late games that I am looking for. Maybe Lillard potentially as one of those guys. But yeah, we'll see how they are and see if we can find a couple of those kind of those gems that might help us along the way.
I noticed you didn't say Seth Curry, so
not going that crazy.
No, nobody here. We wouldn't let you. Mike and myself here, Sixers fans, we wouldn't let you. All right, Steve, let's jump in the first game, Wizards Heat, and knowing, of course, that there are going to be some great options to pay up for. Let's start with the road team and, see if we can approach this from Miami's standpoint. Where are you looking with the Heat?
Yeah, so Miami is the biggest question mark so far. Yep. We've got Bam is questionable as well as Hero is questionable. Bam didn't go through shoot around, so right now we're projecting him as out, but he is still a game time decision. Across the rest of the industry, it feels like they are mostly projecting Bam in because I'm seeing Deadman's ownership really low. So watch our ownership, watch the inactives for this one. I think that they're going to be there could be a pretty big shakeup depending on how that goes here over the next hour or so. And then if we get Bam missing, then I think that makes Deadman a very good play again. So Deadman's mostly been pretty disappointing without Bam. He's had 16 and 25 and 23, I think, in the 3 games that he started. So those DK points are not going to win you anything. He's done them in 25, 29, and 17 minutes. So that's pretty disappointing, but normally he is a better per minute player than that. So I'm still willing to take another good shot on him. He's still really cheap across the industry at 3,800 on DraftKings, 3,700 on FanDuel. I think he could certainly be worth a good shot in that case. His ownership, I think, might fall off a little bit this time, even though it's we don't really have an ownership for him right now to gauge where it's going to be. So we'll see. But I think that some people might be hesitant to go to him after the way he's kind of failed us the last couple of times. So I think that he's going to make a pretty interesting play again. And on the bright side, if he doesn't end up working out, it's an early game and you can go and start your NFL research for tomorrow's slate.
That's a great point. Nice glass half full way to look at it. Just back to the injuries here, and I think it applies both to Bam and Hero. Let's assume both are going. Is it, hey, they're in, don't treat this any other way? Do you have any concerns that playing through injury can damage the minutes, and then that may determine maybe staying away more so than you would be overweight to the field if they were healthy?
Yeah, I think so. One Hero's priced at a price point that I don't think is super attractive. So I think I am going to stay away from him no matter what in this situation. If Bam is in, I think you could take some shots on him because his minutes could be slightly limited, but I would expect that, they're being pretty cautious with him early in the season. So I would expect that he would be pretty close to full go. And I think that he's not been on anybody's radar so far today just because of his questionable status. So I think he won't be very popular. I think that's a okay option in that sense, but he wouldn't be someone that I would be super excited about.
Yeah, I think you're right, man. Anybody else on that bottom end? Do you want to move to Washington? And we could start with Beal for sure at the top, especially 9,400 on DK and beyond.
Yep. Yeah, I think the other one is Jimmy Butler if Bam misses.
Okay.
I think he's going to look pretty good as well. 9,700 on DK, 10-1 on FanDuel. Both of those are pretty good prices, I would say. And I think that would put him in a pretty good spot. If Bam is in, then I don't think he's nearly as interesting.
Now, Beal at 9,400. So as far as this game specifically, it's slate comparative, of course, across the board, but 9,400 for Bradley Beal, and knowing the matchup specifically, if you were paying up at the very least at the 2-guard spot, are you interested in it being Bradley Beal at least? You mentioned Butler, a little bit different scenario as that's more injury dependent at the 3, but for Beal alone at 9,400, not kind of depending on anybody around him, is that at least worth a look, knowing that you're paying up on the slate?
Yeah, I don't think so. I think Butler would make a much better play in that sense. I do think you can go with Beal. He did have a pretty solid outing here in his return, playing pretty much his full allotment of minutes. So I think that he is healthy and good to go in that sense. But he just is priced at a point that is not that favorable, especially if Bam and I guess if Bam and Hero are not in, it would maybe flip the game a little bit and he could be a little bit a better play in that sense. But with a defensive team like Miami that I think is pretty solid, I don't think I would be super excited about Beal.
Yeah, he's super low owned as a result of that, the cost and the matchup. I get it. So it might just be if you've saved money elsewhere and you have money to spend at that spot, it may just be contrarian to the field, if you will, to take a risk on that, knowing so many people. It's basically an ownership pivot. If you, but you then again, right, Steve, you have to make sure that you're allocating your funds properly elsewhere in the other positions.
Right, exactly. The other player I wanted to mention here, it doesn't seem like a big deal, but Daniel Gafford being questionable is one that I'm, paying pretty close attention to, because Montrezl Harrell has been pretty big. He had a pretty disappointing game last time that Gafford missed. Let me see. I think it was he scored somewhere in the 20s, but he got 35 minutes of playing time. The games that Gafford missed earlier in the season, he had that same playing time and scored 40 and 50 points. So I think we might get a little bit of people off of Harrell, especially since it's kind of coming as late news at this point on Gafford. And we know that he has the upside to be able to really break the slate. His price is, much better on FanDuel or on DraftKings at 6,500 versus 7,500 on FanDuel. But I think he's someone that you've really got to pay attention to if we get the news that Gafford is out, even if Gafford isn't someone that you normally think of as a big deal.
All right, man, let's keep it moving here from the Heat Wizards game. Pelicans, Pacers in Indy. We can start here and just kind of build as we have been really from the top down. So when we look, Sabonis, Brogdon, going to be some guys to start with at the home team. But let's start with the Pelicans, I think, more importantly, and try to gauge where you're looking at with maybe a Valanciunas or even an Ingram up there at the top.
Yeah, up top, I think Valanciunas is fine. The problem is he was really great when Ingram was out. With Ingram returning, that's kind of cut into his production here a little bit. So I feel like he should be priced maybe about 8,000, like he is on FanDuel, but he's priced at 9,200 on DraftKings and 3,700 or on 37 on Yahoo, which just it seems a little bit high. The FanDuel price I think is okay. The problem with FanDuel is we've got these guys like Harrell and Dedmon that are center eligible, and he's center eligible as well. So it's a little bit tougher to get to him depending on what that situation ends up there. So overall, it's a little bit tricky on Valanciunas just because of some like kind of site specific things in that pricing and where he qualifies as a spot. So I think that's going to keep his ownership pretty low and does make him a good contrarian option if you want to take the shots there. He does have a 10% boom probability on DraftKings with 4% ownership. So I think that makes him at least somewhat attractive as kind of a contrarian option, but he's just harder to get to. So you almost have to kind of go out of your way if you want to get to him. Ingram, on the other hand, his minutes are ticking up since he returned. Pretty much every game he went from 29, 32, 37, and 39 in the game since he's returned. So he's pretty much back up to full speed the last two games. He's a full go. I went pretty heavy on him last night and trying to get ahead of people. He did okay with 39 points. And I think that he is, kind of also sort of in that range where I think he's going to be a pretty fine play. We've got him owned at about 10% with an optimal lineup percentage of 9. So it means the field's on him about the right amount. I think that ownership is about right, and I'll probably be somewhere around that same range. He wouldn't be one of the first guys I'm plugging into a lineup, but he's not a guy that I'm scared of having in my lineups either.
Yeah, I'm curious because you reference it a lot as well, where it's Yahoo is a nice avenue to take advantage, especially for cost differential and ownership, of course, in the backdrop for the other two sites. Looking at him there, he's a cheaper option, 32 at the 4. Not to say that people should pivot away when Giannis is on the slate, but even from Sabonis, it looks like he's a little easier to get to at 32 on that slate with Yahoo. Brandon Ingram.
Yep. Yeah, I think so as well. That would probably be my preferred place to go to him of all the different sites for sure.
Yeah. Sorry.
Just one other note on Devontae Graham being out. So last night most of his time, actually pretty much all of it, was filled with Kira Lewis and Satoransky. Lewis played a bit more than I was expecting due to how well he was playing. So that got him into the rotation where he hadn't even played at all in the last week. He ended up scoring 33 DK points in 23 minutes. I don't expect that to happen again, and maybe not again in the next month, but watch and see if they end up switching up the starting rotation for him. I kind of am guessing that they're going to stick with Satoransky, but you don't know that for sure. Satoransky, he could have very easily had that same type of game, but he had 25 minutes and went for 12 DraftKings points. So unfortunately, Satoransky was the one that I had a little bit more of. But I think you could have seen either of those flip-flop. So I think either of them, whoever's starting, makes for an okay contrarian play at kind of the minimum price, I think, for both of them.
Yeah, Satoransky definitely at 3K.
Pretty much. So yeah, you could go to either one of them at the minimum price. Just be careful not to chase the Kira Lewis points. He won't have that very many times. It doesn't look like ownership is getting up there, but I feel like there may be a few people that are chasing that. So I would be careful to that, especially if he's not starting.
Is there any value, just to follow up on that, with Alexander Walker, especially coming off of a game where he was just ice cold, and there's also a bounce back element to it? The minutes were there, the shots were there, he just didn't hit anything.
Yeah, I think he looks pretty solid at 5,600 on DraftKings in particular, and on 19 on Yahoo.
Yeah,
where both of those he's getting pretty much no love from the public, and I think that the games like those scare people off. And you could see like Josh Hart is getting kind of the opposite. He's getting a lot of attention coming off of his big game, which he has seen his minutes upticking lately. So it's warranted that he does get more. But I think that Alexander Walker makes a really good pivot play there.
Kyle on the chat actually referencing Hart getting a lot of ownership on FanDuel and wanting to know, Steve, above or below the field with Hart. And you can look at it across the board, not just specifically to FanDuel.
Yeah, so I think I'm probably going to be slightly under the field, it looks like. For instance, on FanDuel, our boom bust says that he should be about 24%. He's coming in at 30% ownership. So it's not like he's way off from that metric, but it feels like you should probably be more in the 20% range than that 30% range. So that's probably how I'm going to lean as well. I mean, he has been, like I said, he's been upticking over the last few weeks. He's had about 3 to 5 more minutes than he had earlier in the season. So that's pretty encouraging, and he's been playing pretty well. I think he's only gone below his projection that we've made for him once out of his last 5. So that's also very encouraging. But, you know, you can always come back to earth at some point, and when the public is very much on him, that worries me a bit.
There you go. That's the last part of it. That element, right, that you must throw in at the end, which is, wait a second, everybody's on Hart. Hit that promo code Awesemo. You see it above us, above Steve, above me. We're going to match your first deposit on Prize Picks up to $100. That's insane. You put in 100 and we'll put in 100. We have shows throughout the week specifically for prizepicks.com, VOD specifically for prizepicks.com, to give you all of the direction combined with Alex and our site's projections on how things will play out individually and for Prize Picks. All right, man, let's hit the Pacers here on the flip side of this. And again, we can start at the top, Sabonis, and then kind of Brogdon as those top 2 guys. A little bit more of a price break for someone like Karis LeVert. DK has him at 6,700, but let's at least start at the top for the Pacers.
Yep. The Pacers overall aren't someone that I'm super excited about. We did get Gafford is in, so no Harrell night, unfortunately. Was kind of looking forward to that one, actually. But so
that changes a lot as you laid out. You're right.
Yeah. Yep. Sabonis, I think his price is too high a little bit. So I'm probably going to stay away from him. He is getting some popularity. Same with Brogdon. Brogdon's at 14% ownership and only 9% in our optimal tools. So that's not very encouraging. Both of those guys, I think I'm going to kind of stay away from. The one that continues to be interesting to me is kind of the Sabonis under assist. We've talked about that on the show. a fair amount. Across I've mentioned it the last week, and a couple of other folks have mentioned it as well. Since we've started promoting it, it's like 7-2 in the 9 games that we've been talking about it. So
Mm.
I think that looks pretty good again too as well. So that's probably like my favorite thing to do from the Pacers today. Not as much on the DFS streets.
Got it. Now, look, I'll take money any way I can make it, Steve. So if you're telling me to place a wager, if you're telling me to buy a coin, or if you're telling me to roster somebody as a punt, I'm listening, man. By all means. All right. So what about Levert as far as, trying to get to him at a more decent price point?
Yeah, I don't even think him is that interesting. It feels like he's still getting some ownership, and I mean, all of these guys are getting ownership. Their price seems high. They don't have anyone out. I mean, it is possible Duarte, I guess, could miss. He's still questionable. They would, but they're not really like Brogdon and Levert and Turner and Sabonis. They like play a full set of minutes already. They're not really going to get any additional minutes from Duarte missing. So he only played even 14 minutes yesterday. I don't know if that was partially due to his nagging injury or if it was Lamb just going nuts in the 23 minutes. But I don't feel like any of those guys are going to really, you know, have a big game anymore. So with Duarte out. I guess we should mention Lamb with his 23 real points and 44 or whatever it was DraftKings points that he got in 16 minutes. Even if Duarte misses, since he only played 16 minutes, people are going to see the 44 points that he scored and being on the top of some of the leaderboards. Just be really careful about that because he still didn't play that many minutes and he's not been a big part of the rotation recently. He's Jeremy Lamb. We know who he is. He isn't some rookie that, is coming out of nowhere and this might be his breakout to be a star. It's Jeremy Lamb. So be careful there.
Anybody else on the back end there? Torrey Craig action? Anybody at the bottom that you may look to is even a punter counter to anybody at the top that people are, you mentioned ownership right there. Turner is the most rostered guy on Yahoo. So anybody at the bottom for Indy that you may get to, Craig, I think would jump out. We talked about him at least last show.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think I'm pretty much going to stay away from the rest of these guys.
All right, let's hit the Thunder in Boston. And again, kind of dealing with game time decision as well as guys being out on the Celtics side. So let's start with the Thunder. And if it's 8,400 for Gilgeous-Alexander on DK, and then you start to move down a little bit, Giddey across the board at 6,200 may be a little bit more workable of a number.
Yeah, I think Giddey looks pretty good, actually. So, for instance, we have him on DraftKings, 8% ownership and 17% boom probability. That looks pretty appealing to me. He's had 2 duds over the last week, but that's fine. He's a rookie, and the rest of the time, he's been very consistent in the mid-30s in his output. So I think that's good. He feels like he's, his minutes are kind of where they are now. The one thing that we do have to remember about Giddey is he's not the same guy that we were, or he's not the same price. He's the same guy, but he's not the same price as he was a couple weeks ago where we were getting him for 3, 4, even 5,000. He's up to 6,000 across the industry. So that is a little bit less appealing, but I do think that he is a pretty good spot here against the Celtics. For SGA's price, I think that's a little bit tougher. I can never fault you for going with SGA. The rest of the team is always going to defer to him, and he has the opportunity to have a really big game at any point in the time. It just doesn't stick out as a huge value play, so it's more of like a contrarian option to fill out your lineup if you're going with a lot of chalk elsewhere. But I definitely have a fair I'll have a fair amount of him.
Yeah, I mean SGA. I'm just looking at Yahoo, going back to it, and on that point guard spot, he's down $32. So somebody you could get a return on that's a decent pivot from the Morant's balls. We'll get to them, Trey, even Dame at the top, depending on ownership, if that makes the case. And then also, as you mentioned, just overall with Giddey, $24 on Yahoo. So maybe that makes a little bit more sense as we kind of talk about the pivot of the site. Maybe that actually looks like the best price point between the two.
Yeah, I think so. I think he looks really good over on Yahoo. That's a good spot, and FanDuel as well, actually. So probably the toughest one is the DraftKings price point, I would say.
At 6,200,
Uh,
yeah.
the rest of the guys, I don't feel too exciting about. Dort, Robinson, Earl. I think these guys, maybe you could put it in one or two of your lineups if you're making a couple of them, but they wouldn't be one of the first guys in one of my lineups. And it looks like the field is paying attention to them still, especially Dort. So that makes it even easier for me to kind of stay away.
Yeah, 5K on DK for Dort, and it's just amazing. The volume of shots are going to be there, but it's such a risk that he's going to knock down enough for the payout to make sense. All right, so let's flip to Boston, and Jason Tatum clearly at the top there, especially with what's happening with Jaylen Brown. So let's start with Tatum. We can move to Horford and really anybody else if there's any savor there from a Smart or somebody even below on this slate. But really, it's Tatum at 9,900 on DK and how much you're willing to swallow the chalk at him really specifically, but versus the slate as well, Steve.
Yeah, I think Tatum makes a lot of sense. He's coming off of 64 and 57 DK points his last two games out without Brown. So they're definitely relying very heavily on him, as you would have expected. He's not really getting, I think he's maybe been picking up an extra minute or so of playing time as well, but that's not a big thing. It's just the extra usage and stuff that comes with Brown being out. So I think he makes a lot of sense. The problem is, looks like everyone else is paying attention to that as well. He's very popular across the board. I have a hard time getting to him at that popularity level. I do think that he should definitely be a part of your player pool, but if you're building your lineup with Tatum, you got to be very careful to include other players that are not nearly as popular in the mix with him as well. So I think that is very important. We also have, to your point about Horford, we have Robert Williams that is missing today. He's doubtful, and Schroeder is question, or I think he's probable now. And
I think you're right. He got bumped up.
So we will expect to have him in the game. But even so, with Robert Williams, we see a big bump in playing time for Grant Williams. I think everyone knows that playing time is coming though, so we do see him getting a little bit more popular. At 3,100, he's okay. He doesn't have a huge upside, but his floor is not too bad either. Unfortunately, yesterday that floor kind of came through with only 12 DraftKings points, but rest of the time he's a pretty consistent player. So I think I will be okay going with him. But back to your point on Horford, I think he looks really good. He gets additional rebounding, in particular, a lot of the defensive stats when Robert Williams misses. So on FanDuel, though, he's going to be very popular. It looks like he's at I don't know if he's the top of our ownership. I don't have it sorted here in that way, but
yeah, he's
at okay, he's at the very one. Yeah, he has that 44% ownership. I still like getting to him at that though.
So you're not underweight to that. You're pretty much on point to that.
Yeah, it looks like I am really close to that number. So I think that looks okay. Even at that level, he's cheap enough and helps you build some lineups that way. And I think on Yahoo, he also looks really good. Also, DraftKings priced up a little bit, so he's not quite as appealing there. But yeah, I think he looks pretty good. And then let's see, we also
Smart's pretty projected. Smart's actually the highest projected owned guy on DK for Boston, just a little bit narrowly above Tatum. Now, clearly at 5,100, it's more of a cost-saving move, but I wonder if how weighted you are to the field on that one.
Yeah, that one looks a little bit tougher for me. I don't really see, it doesn't feel like Smart has been benefited too much by Brown being out, and I would kind of expect that to continue to be the case. Tatum kind of picks up the shooting, Horford picks up kind of some of the defensive stats, and Smart kind of keeps his role steady. So I think he is kind of like one of those guys that just his role is going to be steady, but the field thinks it's going overboard. So I don't know. I think that I'm going to probably be under the field on Smart.
And I know we're going to talk about him specifically. How could we not? I mean, over half of the field is projected to own at least a DK across the board, really, Jalen Suggs. But he jumps out that 3,800 DK low cost pivot, right, to ownership or just money for the PGSG spot, or just depending on where people are rostering him. Can Smart be a pivot from Suggs?
He could, but he's pretty popular himself. So
I mean, 31% gap. That's why I ask. You're right. 21% ownership for anybody is tough to call them a pivot. But when you're pivoting from somebody who's over half owned on the field, or half of the field is owned, I wonder if that could actually play out a little bit easier. And maybe that's why people are going to Smart as a result at 5,100.
Yeah, and that could be. And I think it could be just like what the chat here is saying, that Hero is a lock, and or Smart is a lock, and he just was on fire last game, blah, blah, blah. I think the more you're going to see a lot of people thinking that way. So, it could happen again, but I am going to go tend to go the opposite of what the majority of the people are going to be thinking. And that was a perfect example of that for me.
Yeah, I love it, man. All right, so let's move from OKC and Boston. Charlotte is in Atlanta. We'll start with the road team here on the deeper dive. Again, hit that thumbs up button, please. You're hanging with us. Make sure you're subscribed. The Awesemo DFS. We have the Awesemo Odds, a season-long fantasy football channel. And then really that promo code up there. I know we're talking about Yahoo, FanDuel, DraftKings. We're getting you ready for the slate tonight, but Prize Picks is here, and they're willing to take your money and our money combined. Use that promo code Awesemo. You put in up to 100, and we'll match up to 100. So let's start with Charlotte. Ball clearly and crunching a bunch of lineups. He's popping up there as well. 10-4, though, on DK. It's a lot to spend up for, but is he worth the chalk?
Yeah, so Ball is a great example of a guy that has a big price discrepancy across the board. So that 10-4 price that you recognize, is starting to get pretty tough to pay that. He does make a good pivot play against some of these guys like Tatum, for instance, but it's pretty tough to fill out your lineup, especially now. I think I just saw that Deadman is not going to be our preferred play because it looks like Bam is in.
Yep.
So
And
that makes it
Hero,
a little bit tougher. And so yeah, I think that's going to be a tricky play. And on FanDuel, you could just go to him on FanDuel and Yahoo, where he's 8,700 or 40 on Yahoo, and get him at a much better price point than DraftKings. So that's my preferred option. If I'm going to Ball, I'm going to want to play him on those other sites.
Yeah, he's 12.4% rostered here on Yahoo. So it's not even picking up so much as that pivot, or just the people paying up for him on the slate. So beyond Ball, let's look a little deeper here into Charlotte. Where else can people look at as far as an opportunity to take advantage of some value?
The rest of the team, I think, is pretty fairly priced and doesn't really stand out that well. They're kind of settled to where they are. PJ Washington has been out for a little bit of time now, so the prices have kind of settled in to the appropriate spots. Maybe you have a little bit of a price savings and you can get Gordon Hayward into your lineups on FanDuel. Over there, we have him at 7% ownership and 14% boom probability, so that's a pretty good ratio for him. Outside of that, though, I think most of these other guys are priced pretty fairly and aren't someone that I'm necessarily getting excited about to get into my lineups, but I wouldn't necessarily be super opposed to them either, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, Plumlee may fit that, right? 4,600. We have him on our boom bust tool. And again, all of this here on Awesemo Plus, where you should be taking full advantage of that. But, we have Plumlee as, I believe, our highest rated player on Charlotte to boom. Now, granted, I mean, it's 34.8 to bust, but still, that you referenced the 14% earlier. How about the 16% for Plumlee? Now, this is a major pivot at the center position. You're giving up a lot, but that would be if you're basically pouring chalk in elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. That's a good ratio. He's not getting any appreciation from the rest of the industry. So that boom percentage is a really strong one, and he might make for a good pivot there at 4,600. A little bit more expensive on some of the other sites, but yeah, that's a good call.
Okay. Well, every now and again, I'm just listening and learning, man. So if I throw one back, I'll take that as a win. A win is always a win, brother. Anybody below you want to get to that maybe is a little under the radar, or somebody you mentioned that everybody seems pretty well priced. Mason Plumlee, I mean, if we're talking about him specifically, there probably isn't anybody else. So let's move to Atlanta and look at Trae Young, 9,500 on DK compared with ownership as well. Really just a matter of how heavy to the field you would be. Yahoo, we have him at 38. So I'm not sure if you're looking at a price break elsewhere or if it's just a matter of getting to him again. I mentioned the 9,500 for Trae Young on DK, 16.7 projected ownership we have on Awesemo for him. So a bunch of people are definitely taking that chalk.
Yeah, so Trae Young, I think it makes a lot of sense. He has not been quite the same Trae Young that we saw last year. Not sure if that's just him I mean, it's a little bit more of him shooting poorly than anything. So I would expect him to kind of, pop back up a little bit. I think he's not been able to get to the free throw line quite as often as well. But he did have a huge 70-point game last Sunday. Unfortunately, that was the slate that I didn't play because of NFL, so I didn't get to take advantage of that. So that was that was unfortunate. But yeah, I think that has to remind you that he has the upside to be able to have a big game, and we can't just forget about it like it was last year. So I think that he's a good play to go to again. He also makes a good pivot from some of the guys like Tatum that we talked about. Although again, his ownership is pretty high also, so he's not you're going to get a huge savings from that sense. But I think it is a little bit of a different build from the point guard standpoint to have him in there.
All right. So beyond Young and really just at that top, where else have you found some ability to kind of maneuver?
So I think there are some pretty good things here. So Capella and Collins both are priced pretty fairly in the 7,000 range across the sites. Matchup against Charlotte is a pretty fair one for them, and I don't think that they haven't really been performing quite as well as what we would have expected them coming into the season. Their price is kind of reflective of that. They haven't had those kind of big booming type of games, but they also are pretty consistent too. So I think that they're both pretty fine. Kevin Herter also at 3,800 looks pretty nice. He has a 15% ownership compared to 25% boom probability in our tools. That seems like a pretty good rate for me on DraftKings. He's priced a little bit more aggressively over on FanDuel, so he isn't quite as attractive there. On Yahoo, he's actually even better at only $11. So I think he's kind of back to full health and a full go. So I like going there. He could get hot any given day against Charlotte. Has as good of a shot as any. So I think that that's a fine place to go as well.
All right, brother. Let's move to Milwaukee now. Orlando in Milwaukee. And we can't bury the lead. It's the Jalen Suggs night. Everybody is rushing to Jalen Suggs. So that's the big question for you, Steve. Are you over or underweight to the 51.3% ownership we have for Suggs on draft? Horford has now eclipsed Suggs, right? We talked about that on FanDuel, but Suggs is still the most rostered guy on Yahoo as well. 2 out of 3 sites, he's coming into the lead right now for the slate.
So how things change in one night, right?
Yes.
Suggs has been terrible. The guy that nobody wanted. I think I heard on one of the deeper dives that Adam was saying he tweeted out about how bad Suggs was, and then he had a huge second half, and then he had another huge game right after that. So maybe the turning point was Adam's tweet about how terrible Suggs is, and now he's the golden child that everybody wants.
Kiss of death? Is that what you're saying?
I don't know. That could just be it. I mean, we do get Cole Anthony out this game. So what that makes me wonder is, are we going to get a full allotment of minutes from both teams in this game? That's certainly a concern, with the big point spread. But I do think that Suggs and Wagner as well should be somewhat immune to that, because in theory, Orlando should be wanting to get these guys as many minutes as possible. Continue to, even if it's against some of the lesser rotation on the Milwaukee side, to help them just, continue to improve and get some confidence going, especially if they are playing at least somewhat good again. So I think that is a way that kind of makes me a little bit less worried about the blowout. That's not necessarily the case for Bamba, who also is getting a fair amount of um, ownership as well. So I like all three of those guys, and all of them are going to pick up some extra minutes. And I think all of them look like pretty strong plays to me. We also saw with Cole Anthony out, we're kind of projecting a little bit of extra playing time for Gary Harris, RJ Hampton, Okiki. None of those guys, though, are super exciting. They're fine kind of dart throws that at the minimum prices or close to the minimum prices, and they're going to get extra minutes. And they could actually, they could have a game like Kira Lewis had yesterday, or something like that, where they have some extra minutes to play, and we don't really know how many extra minutes they're going to get, and they just really play really well. Or they could just kind of get some extra minutes and not really do anything with them, like Satoransky got, and then they don't get extra minutes anymore. So they're not safe plays by any means, and they're not really explosive plays, but I think that they are guys to have on your radar.
Yeah, and a lot of these, as you mentioned, just the situation of it. So two of the top 5 guys that are owned, and we have at least on DK, from Wagner all the way up to the top with Suggs. I will say that Odd Shopper is giving you a bunch of opportunities to pound some overs with Suggs. So while from a DFS standpoint, you have to worry about ownership, there's no problem with a lot of people riding this. And from assists, rebounds to points, you can take advantage of that over there on Odd Shopper. Anybody below that we should mention before we hit Giannis and the Bucks?
I think that's pretty good.
Yeah, I think, from Bamba and really Suggs at the top. So let's start with Giannis. And again, you're always going to pay up here. It's just the obvious play of Giannis. Do you find yourself a little over, maybe underweight to the field where we have Giannis projected across all sites?
Yeah, so first, I think Greg SJ1 makes a really good point that we only have 209 likes so far, and that is pretty disrespectful, as he likes to say there. So come on, and 209 out of 1,590 people, that's not too great.
Get that ratio up. Absolutely. We're giving you money on Prize Picks on top of Steve coming in here and making you money on this slate tonight. That should deserve 2 thumbs up if you could do it. Sign out and sign into another YouTube account and hit us with that second thumbs up. We won't tell anybody.
I like it. Giannis is, I don't know. This one is a tough spot for Giannis. The thing is, if you get Giannis, his price is fair in this matchup. The biggest problem I have is the point spread, and I do worry with Cole Anthony being out that we don't get a full allotment of minutes from Giannis. But the other point is we have so many guys from Orlando that we're interested in, and if those players from Orlando are really going to have a big game, then you kind of need the game to stay close. So you want to go to Giannis in that sense. So I think the way that I want to approach it is if I have a couple guys from that other game. So if I have, maybe 2 or 3 of Wagner and Suggs and Bamba or Gary Harris or, whoever, then I probably want to have Giannis in those type of lineups. If I'm not playing any of those guys and I'm trying to fade those guys, I think I'm going to want to fade Giannis too, because if those guys busted, then it's a blowout. Giannis isn't playing a full allotment of minutes, and he's going to likely bust as well. So I think that's how I'm approaching it. I think his price is fair if you're playing just like a cash game. It makes sense to. I don't know if I would get to him. I haven't ran cash games, but especially without Deadman, I haven't seen any of those. So I don't know if you can get to him exactly in there. But I think if he projects well enough for you in that sense, I think he's fine. But just from a game theory strategy, I'm going to play it more with how I play those Orlando guys.
So basically, is there a flip side to that where it may be a deterrent for Giannis because of the blowout factor? And maybe if you're building more lineups, I should say, in tournaments, can you play the blowout factor from Milwaukee?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Yeah, basically look at it from the Bucks standpoint of, all right, well, you're going to stay away from guys at the top. You mentioned Giannis, like not getting to him as much as a deterrent to the blowout. Well, somebody's going to be out there if they're up by 30, and it's not something you would get to, right, if you're only playing a couple of lineups or cash lineups. But if you're building multiple lineups over and it's a deterrent enough to stay away from Giannis a little bit, that's all I'm looking at is who on that bottom end could take full advantage of being up 25-30 in this third quarter.
Yeah. So I hate like guessing on who that might be, because it's just so hard to say for sure. But
Well, it's a small. It's you understand. It's like a small percentage chance of happening,
right.
But that's why if you're building a $150 or 200 lineups, maybe you slide one or two in there.
Right. Yeah. So if we think about who probably wouldn't be playing there at the end, so I think that Giannis, Middleton, Drew, and Portis would not be playing too deep for sure. Although I do like Portis. Portis's price is really good over on FanDuel, and he's getting a lot of love from the public on that. But I do think that with a 22% ownership and a 28% boom probability, he looks pretty solid, especially without Brook Lopez. But if after you go under those, you might get Connaughton or Grayson Allen possibly to stay in a little bit longer than those guys. Like I don't think they would close in a blowout by any means, but they might stay in a little bit longer than, just calling off the game immediately like some of those other guys might. So those guys could potentially be dart throws. Connaughton's a fairly decent, fair price, 4,600 on DraftKings and only 13 on Yahoo. So I think he would be my favorite one in that situation.
Okay, let's look at Memphis here in Minnesota. We could start at the top. Ja Morant. We talked earlier about Ball and looking at paying up at that position, specifically Morant, $42 on Yahoo. So clearly, the price is going to reflect. Let's start with Morant, and then maybe Dillon Brooks looks like downgraded. Anybody else you were looking at with Memphis?
Yeah, overall, I think Memphis looks pretty solid, and our tools show that for a lot of guys also. So we have Dillon Brooks as the main driver for that. He's back out. He's been playing pretty well since he came back, but he's back on the injured list. Morant did have a little bit of a cool down while Brooks was back. That was a little bit of a concern that I had mentioned last week when we were talking about him. So I think with Brooks back out, you should see Morant kind of pick up the usage and taking the game over a little bit more from a scoring standpoint. So he's one of my favorite pay up options, I would say today, especially given that his ownership is in the low double digits, maybe around 11 to 10. And I think that makes him pretty attractive. And people are going to just look at, he's kind of coming back to where he was last year, but not realize that maybe Dillon Brooks might have been the driving factor for that. And then also Kyle Anderson is a pretty big beneficiary from this absent. We have him projecting at 29 minutes, which is pretty big bump up for where he has been. And it does seem like the field is paying attention to that. But even so, I think we show him at a 41% boom probability compared to 29% ownership. So he looks pretty good across the board at that 5,000 range. And I think especially since we're not having the value opening up that maybe we were thinking we might have, he looks pretty good.
All right, the flip side, now we have the three guys clearly with the Wolves. We've talked about this in this scenario, Towns, Edwards, and then all of a sudden, how appealing someone like D'Angelo Russell can be, especially on like the 8 to 10 game slate. So let's start at the top there with Minnesota and maybe a guy or two who could, and doesn't have to be, somebody who could jump out below.
Yeah, so I think on Minnesota, also a lot of guys look pretty good there. So yeah, we've got Towns looks pretty good at the higher price range, especially on. Yeah, I think he looks good across the board actually. So I'm good with him. Edwards has really put up a nice start for the rest of the season. He's at a guy that I think I can really get behind. He's consistently scoring in the mid to upper 30s. So I think that looks really good on his sophomore season here. And then I would say the rest of Russell also has been consistent, and then Beverly also is a very good spot too. So I think all those guys look good. Beverly has been getting priced up a little bit
Yeah, I noticed
here
that.
recently, so he's maybe not quite as good as what he was a few days ago. But yeah, I think Minnesota looks pretty good. This game overall is one of the games I really like.
Yeah, he's still at $17 on Yahoo, so not even at that $20 specific range. So that might be a good place if you're looking at Patrick Beverly. All right, I know we've hit warp speed here. That's mostly due to my poor time management. So we're going to knock these two games out. The extended live before lock is coming your way in a matter of minutes here. And it's not only extended as far as time is concerned, but also with another body. So you have Terry, Matt, and then Greg hosting it. So let's look at the Jazz on the road first, and then we can wind out there with this game.
Yep. So I think it's a perfect that we don't have a lot of time for these because they're not nearly as
Yes, and you
interesting.
mentioned that from the jump. Maybe it was
So
subconsciously planted in my brain, Steve.
yeah, no doubt. So on Utah, I don't have anyone that I'm super excited about. You can get to Gobert over on Yahoo, but even there, he's garnering a lot of popularity. I'm not really sure why he is so popular because I'm not really coming up with him a ton. But yeah, he's probably my favorite play, and he's also the public's. But I think I'm gonna stay away from him more than not. And the rest of the guys on the team are just kind of like dart throws that if you feel like Donovan Mitchell is going to have a big game, you could go to him.
Not
On
even in.
sec
Yeah. Go ahead. Sorry.
on Sacramento, I think it's pretty much the same. You could go to Metu. I think he is, especially since 4,200 is a pretty good price tag. He's been starting the last few games. I think that makes plenty of sense. De'Aaron Fox has been really cold from the field here the start of the year. His true shooting has gone from 56% to 49%, kind of a lot like Lillard in the other game. So you could bank on that bouncing up a little bit, but that's not something that I'm ruling to count on too much.
All right. So let's move to our final game then. And we'll look at the Sixers in Portland, and really two guys at the top, one on each side that we have to factor in. Still a lot of issues and injury guys out for the Sixers. Tobias Harris, though, and the price reflecting it clearly, 8,100 on DK. There's going to be the volume, there's going to be the minutes, no issue there as far as his health is concerned. And then we have all sites catching up to Drummond from a price standpoint. Still like Maxi a lot, although even he had DK 7,100 for Maxi. So I don't know if he's even appeal. I can't let anybody in good conscience, or at least I have to put up my own objection and say, please don't rush to get to Seth Curry. That's all. That's the only, that's the only whatever it would be that I'd have to say out there as far a caveat, if you will, for Seth. But everybody else, I'll defer to you.
Yeah. So the thing with Drummond, and we kind of were talking about that this before the show, is I think what we found out with Drummond, he's kind of crashed down back to reality. He was a guy that he could go out there, and if you let him play big minutes for a game or two, he is fine, but his legs are not nearly what they were a few games ago. He's just kind of running on empty, it feels like. Over the last 5 games, his defensive rebounding rate has plummeted from the mid 30s to 10%. And on the offensive rebounding side, he was in the mid teens and is down to 5%. So he's just not getting to the boards. He doesn't have quite the effort. And maybe later in the year, after Embiid has been back for a while and Drummond's had a time to regain some of his legs, he's going to be back to a good play. But right now, he's not nearly that, and he's been priced up along the way. So he's a tough one to get to. Tobias Harris hasn't really even capitalized too much either. I do think that he's a pretty good play, though. He's been had a score of under 40 in 3 of the last 4 games since he's returned, so he's not quite there yet. The thing he did do, though, was flash his upside with a 51 DK point game the other game. So you know that he can break a big game any given point, and he's priced favorably and has small forward eligibility on FanDuel at 7,500. So for whatever reason, FanDuel continues to give us a good price on Tobias Harris, so I think I will go to him there if I have the option.
Okay. And anything else really? I mean, you mentioned Drummond, the price point there. It's tough to get to below those top guys. I mean, Curry, 5K, not worth it, right?
I don't think so. I think I'll stay away from the rest of the team pretty much.
Yes, you got it. All right. Let's look at Lillard. And no issue. Looks like playing through the abdomen. So we'll count him in by all means. Looking at going up against at least the Sixers, good matchup for both of those guys in the backcourt, I would think. So let's start with Lillard and then the trickle down effect to CJ and else.
Yeah, I think I agree. Both Lillard and McCollum look pretty tasty to me this game. Um, you know, Lillard continues to still have problems with his shooting. His true shooting is at 49% versus 62% last year, and he's not getting any better at it. I keep banking that one of those days it's coming, and I keep putting a fair amount of my lineups with him in it. And I think I'm going to do it again today, and hopefully that this is the shot. I think Philadelphia is a good team that could be the time to get him back on track, but certainly he has more wrong than with him right now than just defensive prowess. So I am going to be tempering my expectations, but I am going to kind of continue to assume that his true shooting does in fact improve at some point, and hopefully I will still have some money left by the time it does so that I can take advantage of it. So if it was today, that would be great. If it's a couple of months from now, maybe not, not so much.
Real quick on Nurkic at 6,300 for DK. It's not a great price break by any means, but Drummond at a gas, no Embiid. It's a matchup specific play this slate. That's why I ask if there's any interest there.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Drummond is definitely. I don't know if Nurkic is the guy that can take advantage of it, but
that's why I asked.
but Drummond is the type of player to allow it to happen. So that's a good point, and one that I hadn't considered as closely. But I think that yeah, I think that makes sense. We are showing him at 13% room probability and only 4% ownership. So a lot of the field is not paying attention to it, and I think I'll take a few shots on that as well.
All right, I'm going to go out on a high note then, if that's okay with you, Steve.
That sounds great.
That's Steve Buzzard. That's how you follow and thank him on Twitter at Shander Show. For me, Mike Awesemo producing. Mike's done like every single show we've had on our channel today. I know because this is the third show I've done on our channel today. So thanks to Mike for sticking in. You've got Greg, you've got Matt, you've got Terry, the trio coming your way for the next 90 minutes, getting you ready for tonight's slate. So thank you, Steve. Thanks to everybody out there. Please hit that thumbs up button on our way out. But the fellas are coming up next, and you can take advantage one more time of that promo code Awesemo, AWESCMO, and we'll match your first deposit up to $100. All right, brother. We'll see you next week. Thanks to Steve. Thanks to you out there. Don't go anywhere. Live before lock right now.
Okay. Yeah, well, what led to us doing the 3-man today?
The
Gotcha.
schedule's been drafted with a 3-man a couple times, and then it keeps falling apart. Yeah. This is the first time we actually managed to pull it off. I like the 3-mans. I think it's fun.
The music stop intentionally, or can they still hear it?
It's funny, that stopped exactly when I clicked on something that I don't know what the hell I closed.
Oh, it had totally stopped in my ears.
Yeah, same here. Oh, Fantasy Cruncher. That's what I closed. That was smooth.
How much time do you think Jordan spends making this music?
I don't know, but his tracks slap. That's all I'm going to say.
It's got to be, I mean, most of his spare time, right? Just spent in his little apartment there with some headphones on.
Yeah, that or spending time with that guy who was eating food out of his refrigerator in the background. Yeah. It is the Awesemo NBA Live Before Lock show, sponsored by Prize Picks, and a little bit of something different today. We have not one person with me today, but two. I'm joined by Matt LaMarca and Terry McBride, so I'm trying to format the show a little bit differently, guys. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to be hosting. That should be obvious by now. But then I'm going to throw it to these guys when I ask questions. I'm going to have Terry break it down from a FanDuel perspective, Matt break it down from a DraftKings perspective. So kind of try to encompass a little bit of everything, a little bit different of a format to the show, and we'll see how it goes. We've had some of these Saturday night shows scheduled for a 3-man booth, and as Terry said when the mics were hot before the show, if you guys didn't hear it, it's falling apart every time this season. But maybe it'll be here to stay. Try this different format, see how it goes. Guys, how are we doing? And starting with Terry, how do you feel about this slate?
I like it. And now that we've gotten some of the important information, particularly for the FanDuel slate, that Miami Heat situation was really jamming things up in terms of where our optimal rates were and how the center spot was looking, because a few of the key players that were center only, with Dwayne Dedmon soaking up all of that optimal lineup rate, the whole rest of the slate was kind of warping below him. So now that we know he's out of the way, I kind of like the looks of where we're at. It's a lot more of a comfortable slate, and there's a lot more clear-cut plays on it.
Yeah, and I mean, if you look at the injury report right now, pretty clean looking. We've got nobody currently listed as questionable that's of any significance. Actually, nobody, I think, at all that's really currently listed as questionable. End of the bench guys, Semi Ojeleye, Josh Okogie. But for the most part, anybody that matters that was on the injury report, we've got an update on them. So, Matt, of the players that have been ruled in, ruled out, which piece of news is going to be impacting your lineups most significantly?
Yeah, the Adebayo / Hero news, I think, is the biggest that we've had so far. We could have looked at a guy like Dwayne Dedmon for some value. The Heat, guys like Jimmy Butler, maybe you could have penciled him in for a few additional shot attempts without Tyler Hero. But since they're essentially going to be at full strength, there's not a ton to take away there. That matchup, pretty unappealing, 208.5 total. The totals just continue to look. It's like we're back in the 90s, man. Like if you get a total over 220 these days, it's like full on. You can stack that game to the moon. So it's going to be an interesting slate. I'm not sure I'm digging it as much as it sounds like Terry is, just because I think there's some like weird chalk plays that you really have to kind of take a stand on. But you know what? It's an 8-game basketball slate, and that's all we can ask for.
So is one of those weird plays, because starting at the guard position, Matt, is one of those plays Jalen Suggs, or is he one of the guys you're feeling more confident in? Because at least on DraftKings right now, Jalen Suggs by far the most popular play on the slate. No Cole Anthony in the lineup. So 49.3% ownership projected for Jalen Suggs over on DK 3,800. Point guard and shooting guard eligibility. How are you handling all the chalk going to him?
Yeah, I think he's kind of a good chalk situation for me. He's somebody that I'm looking to play. For what it's worth, we do have him with a negative leverage score in the boom bust tool. He's showing up a little over 42% in the optimal, so he's not reaching that projected ownership, but I still think he's just too good of a play on a slate that's kind of hurting for value at times, especially on DraftKings with how ridiculous some of the stud pricing has gotten. You need like every bit of value that you can find. And Suggs just stands out as too good of a play at 3,800 with no Cole Anthony. He saw about 32 minutes in their last game. He's right around 0.8 fantasy points per minute on the year. If he does that again, he's going to be, a strong value at his current price tag. I'll let Terry talk about it on FanDuel. I think it's a little bit of a different conversation over there, but on DraftKings, at least, I think Suggs is kind of a must play.
All right, so Terry, I'm going to ask you about FanDuel then, because, much like on DK, Jalen Suggs is very popular on FanDuel, but there's a little bit of a pricing difference. He's 3,800 on DK, but on FanDuel, he's 4,800. Still, though, picking up 41.1% ownership, that same point guard, shooting guard eligibility. So with the elevated price point, does that have you feeling any different about the viability of Jalen Suggs as a chalk play in large field tournaments?
So I'd probably be happier in general with the slate if that was the case, if it was taking him down a peg for me, but it's really not. He's sitting at the top of our board if we sort by optimal lineup appearance rate. It is kind of like it is across town, negatively leveraged. It's a negative 8.1, slightly more negatively leveraged for the higher price albeit against a higher cap, but you do get a higher relative price there at 4,800. It's 1,000 more expensive. Very solid boom score probability on him, though. The top boom score probability at 38.2%. I think there's just enough for him to do out on the court. Like Matt said, he's at 0.79 fantasy points per minute across the course of the season so far, getting 28.2 minutes per night. We've got him projected for more minutes with Cole Anthony out, and he's done that. 19.3% assist share is very nice, but only a 43.8% true shooting percentage for the kid so far. If any of his shots start to fall, it's going to be easy enough for him to rack up around a fantasy point per minute at some point. So maybe that's tonight. I wrote him up yesterday and he kind of delivered on that one. So maybe we get it back to back. Field fell in love with him today. It's definitely less comfortable, but I think I'm going to be there. I think he warrants the shares.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you guys. And one other thing I'll add also with this game is a little bit of concern about a blowout. We've got the Magic missing their best player this year in Cole Anthony, 12-point spread. But I think you could argue that a blowout is the best case scenario for Jalen Suggs, because if this game's competitive, he's going to be drawing Drew Holiday, Giannis on the court. You might get a situation in the fourth quarter where he's going up against the backups for the Bucks, and that could arguably even be better for him if the Magic are trailing by, say, like 30 points in the fourth quarter or something like that. But Matt, I'm going to ask you, in terms of cheap guard options, is there anybody that you look at as being a good pivot or leverage play off of Suggs on DK?
I mean, you could potentially look at RJ Hampton if you wanted to stay in the same backcourt. He's also showing up kind of negatively leveraged, doesn't have nearly the same upside to me. I think your best bets are all kind of fitting the same mold, right? Where they're going to be projected to be over-owned compared to the optimal rate. Like if you're looking to fade Suggs, you might be better off just going in a completely different lineup construction. Go and pay up for a Ja Morant or a LaMelo Ball, something like that. I don't think that you're going to find someone in that same price range that checks all the same boxes that Suggs does.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anybody who's quite the same. I certainly have more exposure to Suggs than anybody else. But Tara, I'm going to ask you on FanDuel, we've got Desmond Bane, who is shooting guard eligibility, the same exact price as Suggs. I actually don't have them projected too much differently today. I like Bane and Suggs both quite a bit. For the Memphis Grizzlies today, there is no DeAnthony Melton. Dylan Brooks officially listed as doubtful. So with that in mind, I think there's a lot more playing time to go around in that Memphis backcourt. I think some people who listen know by now my opinion on Dylan Brooks. He goes out there, he takes a whole lot of shots. He thinks he's the best player in the world when he isn't really. So I think getting him off the court, that opens up a whole lot of usage in that Memphis Grizzlies offense. I like getting to Desmond Bane here on the cheap end. Is he somebody you're on?
Yeah, he's on my list for sure. I've got him projected not a ton more than the site does, but like 1.5 more, and that makes a little bit of a difference for him at price. 4,800, not a big price to pay at the shooting guard spot. And he comes up in terms of the probability a little bit better for me than he does at the site. We've got him with a 12% optimal lineup appearance rate, which is, with Suggs at 33%, you're talking about a significant margin between the two. What I don't like is that he's getting more negatively leveraged. He's got a 23.2% ownership projection against that 12% optimal rate. That puts him at a negative 11.2 with a lower median projection than Suggs has. It's a lower overall aggregate ownership. It's 41% ownership versus the 23%. But in terms of what our expectation is, what the probability is going by Alex's numbers, it's a little bit less comfortable. It's a more negatively leveraged situation. So I'm not sure how much I go there if I'm going with the boss's numbers. If I'm going with mine, I'll get a little bit more of them. And right now, that's where I'm leaning. I think we might not be fully accounting for the absences in that backcourt yet. So I think it might go up as we talk on the site's numbers, and it'll probably bring it in line with yours and my expectations. So yeah, FanDuel slate, I'll have a little bit of them. Another guy who's somewhat interesting, same exact price as both of those guys, point guard only eligibility, is Pat Beverly at the $4,800 price. And he's in a similar situation where he's also negatively leveraged. So I'm kind of juggling shares of all three of those guys.
Yeah, I'm not going to be playing a whole bunch of Patrick Beverly today. There's been other slates where I think it's made sense to get to him. He's fairly cheap in both FanDuel and DraftKings, like you just said, Terry, but I think there's a fairly capped upside for Patrick Beverly. A whole lot of games where you're seeing 24 to 26 fantasy points from him at his price point. That's good, but generally not enough to win a tournament. So once again, I really do like Desmond Bane as somebody who I think is being a little bit overlooked in this price range on both DK and FanDuel. And the other thing too is while he's picking up some ownership, I just don't think the 21.7% on DK and on FanDuel, the number for Bane at 23.2%, it's not nearly high enough in my opinion. Matt, where do you stand with Desmond Bane over on DK?
Yeah, I do think Bane's interesting, right? He's at just under 1 DraftKings point per minute with DeAnthony Melton and Dylan Brooks off the court this season. We've kind of seen the transformation with Bane. Like, he is not afraid to shoot the ball this season. He was kind of a little bit, more passive as a rookie. So, I don't hate that call. I do think, again, like, the Suggs thing just kind of pushes me where he's the guard that's taking up most of my lineup spaces when I'm paying down, most of my brain space when I'm thinking about the value plays. But certainly like 4,500, you can't knock him all that much considering what we've seen from him this year.
All right, so we talked about some of the value guys here. Now, Terry, if you're paying up at guard on FanDuel, whether it be point guard or shooting guard, number one, is that something that you're looking to do much on this slate? And then number two, who is your favorite pay up option at the guard position today?
Yeah, so I am paying up with at least one of the guard spots with all the flexibility between point guard and shooting guard for a lot of the guys in the value range and then in the mid range. And like I throw Dennis Schroeder into that mix at the mid range at 5,800 flex to both guard spots. It just buys you room to play some mid range forwards. And there's a lot of mid range forwards and then spend some money at the guard spot. So I like getting to some LaMelo Ball at 8,700, one of our more highly optimal guards on the slate. Point guard only eligibility for him. Dame Lillard, similar story. Point guard only eligibility, 20% optimal, coming up with positive leverage. I'm happy to keep going back to that. Well, Steve was talking about it on the last show. A 49.1% true shooting percentage for the season, still at 1.07 FanDuel points per minute. So he still turns in a decent per minute mark, but that's not Dame Lillard. We know he's better than that. I will take shots all day on Dame Lillard bouncing back at 8,500. So I like that spot a lot. CJ McCollum in the same offense, he's a little bit less expensive at 7,600. But I think, if we're considering that a pay up price relative to some of the other prices at guard today, I think he's very, very appealing there as well.
Yeah, so I'm positive that Damian Lillard's injured right now. Not a doubt in my mind, as evidenced by he's missed a game recently. He's been listed as questionable. If you're watching the games, he's fairly constantly wincing and grabbing at his stomach. He's dealing with an abdominal issue. Now, with that said, he's very cheap on FanDuel. And the matchup against Philadelphia 76ers, I don't think is super difficult with Joel Embiid off the court. So at that FanDuel price, 8,500, I have no issue whatsoever getting to a Damian Lillard there. Also, ownership only in the teens. If he was 8,500 in this matchup 2 weeks ago, we'd probably be looking at like 35% ownership from Lillard. People are just a little bit scared off by the abdominal issue, but I do think it's something that he is going to overcome at some point. Wouldn't play him in cash games, tournaments. I definitely think that makes some sense. Now, same question for you, Matt. If you're paying up for a guard on a DK, is there anybody in particular that stands out to you, or is this a position, point guard, shooting guard, you don't really love paying up for today?
Well, first of all, someone should tell Chauncey Billups that Damian Lillard is hurt, I think. He's playing a number of minutes that would make Tom Thibodeau blush right now. Like Tom Thibodeau called him up and was like, "Are you sure 40 minutes a game in November? You feel it?" So I echo everything that Terry said there. Like you do expect some bounce back, but I'm going all the way up to the top. I'm going with LaMelo. I'm going with Ja. They're 10-4 and 10-2 respectively. LaMelo has displayed a ceiling this season that rivals, a guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo. And then the same thing goes for Ja. His ceiling hasn't been as large, but you factor in the injuries to Brooks, to Melton, right? His usage rate is up to almost 35% with both guys off the floor this season. So I think both guys are very strong plays. They're both showing up as positively leveraged. We have Morant projected for right around 13% ownership on DraftKings, and we have Ball down at less than 6%. So I think at those numbers, you kind of have to be interested in those two guys.
Yeah. So for me, I've not really rostered Ja Morant very much this year. I still tend to think he's just a little bit too pricey for my liking. I don't have an issue with LaMelo Ball today. At the guard position, I really haven't paid up that often. I got to some of Trae Young. Anthony Edwards, we're going to consider him a pay-up option at 8,000, but not quite the top tier of the pricing range. I paid up more at forward, which we'll get to later. Guys like Giannis, Tatum, those were my preferred pay-up options today. We did get a super chat in here from Matty Mitch, which is a DK question here. So I'm going to throw it to you, Matt. It also is related to Desmond Bane, who we talked about before, but he said, do you like Bane or Kyle Anderson better? Would you play both of them in DK cash? Yes, personally, I would play both of them in DK cash. Would you play both of them in DK cash, Matt? And do you have a preference between the two?
Yeah, just checking the numbers here. Those guys are slightly negative leveraged, negatively correlated historically, but it's a very minor amount. And again, we have to kind of take into account the fact that this season they've been playing a little bit different, the Grizzlies. I give an edge to Anderson. Anderson is a guy that we know is like a fantasy point per minute type of guy when he's on the court. It just depends on how many minutes he's going to get. If we think he can get, 28 minutes or so tonight, I have no doubts that he's going to return value at 4,600. I have no problem playing both together, but if I'm only choosing one, it would be Anderson.
Okay. Yeah. So by the way, also cash, I don't really care that much if guys are negatively correlated in cash games. And sometimes I actually think it's almost beneficial because it's a value situation. You're kind of capturing all of the extra minutes and usage there. Once again, no Dylan Brooks expected for the Memphis Grizzlies today. D'Anthony Melton is out, so there's extra playing time, usage available there. And it's something I don't have any issue with getting to the two of those guys whatsoever. Terry, I'm going to ask you now, any guards that we've not yet talked about on FanDuel that are an important piece of your build that we should be bringing up?
I'm getting to, you mentioned Anthony Edwards, who's got shooting guard eligibility on the site as a pay-up option. I was getting to some of him a little bit more earlier when there was a little bit more value on that board with Dedmon in there. So he's kind of come down in shares a little, but I'll have some of them. And then just kind of some of the mix and match pieces. Like I'm getting a few shares of Josh Hart in crunches. I'm getting some shares of Franz Wagner in crunches, some shares of D. Russell. But most of the guys that I care about are the guys at the top with the value, like Suggs and like Schroeder, who we got confirmed is available, by the way. He had a Q tag earlier. And then, a couple of the pay ups that we talked about. So really not that much. I didn't mention Ja when we were talking about the FanDuel side of things because he's 10K. So he's a little bit more of a pay up option than some of the guys, which makes him slip down the board a little bit in terms of the optimal rate, in terms of the boom score probability. But with a 4.9 leverage score, he's one of the more positively leveraged plays available on the slate and definitely one of the top positively leveraged pay up options on the FanDuel slate. So he's a guy I definitely want to get to. He's just not like a first man in. He's a guy you kind of have to build toward.
Yeah, I once again, I'm on Anthony Edwards a little bit here today. I like him a little more favorable looking to me on DK than FanDuel, but I've been rostering Anthony Edwards at a pretty big clip so far this year. His usage rate is astronomical, and at least he's better than some other. Like I was talking about how before Dylan Brooks takes more shots than warranted. Anthony Edwards kind of does to an extent too. Like there's a lot of games this year where you're watching the Minnesota Timberwolves, and it's like D'Angelo Russell, Anthony Edwards, and Patrick Beverley all will take more shots than Karl Anthony Towns, which shouldn't be the case, but at least Edwards is actually legitimately good. I'm going to throw this to you now, Matt, to ask you about DK. Are there any guards we have not yet brought up that are important pieces on this slate for you?
Yeah, I want to throw it out there that I am team D'Angelo Russell over team Anthony Edwards. Not as far as actual basketball skill goes. I think Edwards clearly is going to be the better player of the two, but I just think Russell right now is the better fantasy asset. We've seen it the last couple of games. He has been right around 35, 38, 40 DraftKings points, and he hasn't made any shots. And I know that asking D'Angelo Russell to make shots is a tough ask, right? The dude can be brutal at times, but we're talking, less than 30% from three, 35% from the field. Like, he's going to have a night where the ball goes in. All NBA players have that night. And when it does finally happen for Russell, I think that he's going to put up a big number. So I have plenty of Russell. I have plenty of Donovan Mitchell tonight. I think that this is a good bounce back spot for him against Sacramento. The Jazz have the second highest implied team total on the slate at right around 115 points. Mitchell's price tag has come down to 8,700, which doesn't sound all that cheap. But again, you have to take everything into context on DraftKings today. When you're paying more than 10,000 for LaMelo and Ja, 87 for Donovan Mitchell starts to sound pretty good.
Yeah, I think that I agree with you. There's certainly upside there. D'Angelo Russell. I prefer Anthony Edwards, D'Angelo Russell, fantasy and real life, but your point is taken. Certainly, D'Angelo Russell not going to be shy to shoot the basketball. We've seen him show some pretty significant upside, even if it's been spotty this year, particularly some of the efficiency. So that's going to wrap up the guard position for us. We're going to move over to the forwards, but first, guys, if you haven't done it yet, do us a favor. Like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've got all kinds of content that's on the channel. And also, we're covering a lot of college basketball DFS stuff. And if you guys are new to college basketball DFS, you could sign up for an Awesemo Plus college basketball DFS membership using the promo code Coach K, all one word, all capital letters. Coach K is in Coach K, the coach of the Duke Blue Devils. And that will get you $5 off your first week of Awesemo Plus for college basketball. You can activate that coupon by clicking on the link in the description box below. And this offer is valid through Saturday, November 20th, which is today. So if you're looking to sign up for a college basketball package, today is the last day to do so using that promo code, Coach K. All right, guys, let's move on over to the forward position. And I want to ask Terry about Kyle Anderson. We talked about him a little bit on DK. I like him on DK. Matt also likes him on DK. We've got the same situation. Guys out for the Memphis Grizzlies. Dylan Brooks not expected to play, and DeAnthony Melton not expected to play. So do you like him on FanDuel, Terry, as much as Matt and I like him on DK?
Yeah, can't really get away from him on this slate. 5,300 small forward and power forward eligibility on the FanDuel slate. So you get him in a lot of flexible spots. Really key to lineup building from what I was seeing across the optimal lineups that I ran. I dashed off. I like to run like 1,000 optimals just to see where the pieces fall, how many optimal lineups can come off the board before a guy falls out of the 100% range. And we saw that pretty quickly today with Suggs, Kyle Anderson, and Al Horford were the top guys coming up in the optimal. But it came up pretty quickly. It was around like lineup 50 that none of them had 100% anymore. But they still do fall in 250 lineups that I ended up dashing off. Anderson's the third most frequently owned guy at 83.3% of going into the slate, the optimal lineups. So he's just an unavoidable building block type of a piece today. And Matt brought him up before, a 1.0 fantasy point per minute on FanDuel so far for the season, 52.6% true shooting, does a little bit of everything, 15.9% assist percentage, 11.6% rebounding. So he's a player that I like, that we can certainly get to. 18.1% usage last year gave us 1.08 fantasy points per minute. He's seeing less usage in a smaller role this year, and that's kind of knocked the points per minute down. But at that price, a point per minute is perfectly acceptable. So, yeah, foundational piece for builds on FanDuel today.
All right. And by the way, shout out to our guy, Savoya Boy. I believe that's how it's pronounced in the YouTube chat. He's currently listening to the show while making snacks for his wife's boyfriend, which, I mean, you got to respect the hustle right there. So we like you tuning in and listening to the show, no matter what you have going on in your life. Now, Matt, I'm going to ask you the forward position. I talked about it before. There's a whole bunch of forwards that I like paying up for today. And kind of same goes for DK and FanDuel. I like getting to Jason Tatum. No Robert Williams, no Jaylen Brown for the Celtics. I like getting to Giannis Antetokounmpo because he's Giannis. I kind of always like getting to him. And neither of them are all that popular today. We talked about some guard options that we like paying up for. But which forwards do you like to pay up for, or do you prefer paying up for guards today?
I think I kind of like paying up for the guards. I'm certainly not going to fault you if you like Giannis, if you like Tatum, if you like Jimmy Butler, but again, the price tags on those three guys are pretty insane at the moment. Giannis has barely returned value in 2 straight games, scoring over 60, right? Like we need Giannis to get to 70 plus to be a smash at 12K. And he can certainly do that, but I get why his ownership isn't popping the way that it would when he's priced at, 10-5 or 11. So I think that there are some interesting values at small forward and power forward on this slate, right? Like I mentioned at guard, I'm finding it hard to pivot away from Suggs. I think you can pivot away from some of the chalkier options at forward relatively easy, right? You've got some of these Atlanta guys. Kevin Huerter is 3,800. We have him projected for like 16% ownership. Cam Reddish, 3,200. We have him projected around 13%. Josh Richardson is 3,200. He's going to play. He's been, seeing mid-20s minutes for the shorthanded Celtics. I think that it's easier to tell yourself a story that, you're going to get 30 plus from one of these cheap forwards that might be flying under the radar, as opposed to one of the guards outside of Suggs.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot of cheaper forwards I like getting to, but still, in terms of the pay up, here's where I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. DK's priced the high-end guys fairly efficiently, especially lately. So I don't know that we actually need 70 fantasy points out of Giannis, because all of the expensive guys are pretty expensive. I think if a bunch of these cheap guys go off, like let's say Jalen Suggs scores 35 fantasy points, maybe Desmond Bane, Kyle Anderson, they both score 30. Then it's just going to be whoever scores the most fantasy points of the high end. And then you get to point, Giannis might score 55 fantasy points, but if that's more than guys like Ja Morant, Karl Anthony Towns, Jason Tatum, then he's going to be in the optimal lineup anyway, just because we already have a bunch of cheap guys that have gotten there. So to me, I don't have Giannis projected for an absurd amount of fantasy points. I have him for 56 today, and that's still enough for me to get around double the field. So now, Terry, I'm going to ask you, pay up options, small forward, power forward on FanDuel, which do you like getting to, if any?
Yeah, everything you just said is a lot less relevant on the FanDuel slate with the pricing, right? It's just kind of broken at the top. You see a guy like, you go to the guard spot and you look at a guy like LaMelo Ball, priced like a superstar and deservedly so at 10-4 on DK, 8,700 on the FanDuel slate. That really changes things. So that does demand that kind of monster performance out of a guy priced at 11.5 like Giannis is. Everybody else on the board is significantly cheaper. So there's a lot less room for error on that play on the FanDuel slate. That's not really keeping him out of lineups. Like, he's coming up a decent amount in crunches. He's coming up more to the point in our optimal lineup 20% of the time. So he's a relevant play on the board, even with the big price tag. So I'm definitely getting to some Giannis shares. I like it. Good boom score probability. We all know that he's one of the best performers, if not the best performer, 1.68 fantasy points per minute for this season. Just absurd numbers out of Giannis. So I'm happy to get there where I can. You mentioned Jason Tatum. I've got him a little bit higher on my board. I wrote him up this afternoon. You're paying a lot less freight for him at 9,700, flexibility to both forward spots. And I feel like he's disappointed us a little bit on the season, coming on a little bit more lately. But for all the opportunity that he's had, he's delivered 1.18 fantasy points per minute on a little bit more usage than he was getting last season when he was at 1.23 fantasy points per minute. True shooting only at 50.6% on the season. I think there's more room for Jason Tatum's talent to take over. And if we can capture that kind of a night from him, I'm happy to get there. So I'll have Tatum shares again. I was liking it a little bit more when I was thinking Al Horford also wouldn't be playing along with some of the other absences, but we are going to get Horford. I do like Horford on this slate as well. He's our second most frequently optimal guy, and we get him at the power forward spot on FanDuel. So another guy on the board there. A lot less of a pay up there, though. He's in the mid-range.
All right. So, Matt, I want to ask you, we've got Cole Anthony out for the Magic, and we've talked about the impact on Jalen Suggs, but there's other players on the Magic that are going to benefit as well. So I'm getting to a decent amount of Franz Wagner today, 4,300 over on DK, projected for 22% ownership. I think that number could use to be a little bit higher. The FanDuel price a little steeper at 5,100, so less of a priority there. But on DK with Franz Wagner priced at 4,300, what do you make of him at his 22% ownership projection?
Yeah, I think I'm fading him, not fading him. I want to be underweight on Wagner. He's played 110 minutes with Anthony off the court this season. 0.62 DraftKings points per minute. So he may still be able to get there through sheer volume, but I don't see a ton of ceiling at his price tag. Like, I would rather, again, I think the Heat guys or the Hawks guys, excuse me, have a little bit more upside at their price tags than Wagner does. And, you know, like, he's been good, right? He's scored over 28 in, it looks like, 4 of his last 5 games. So I certainly don't blame you if Wagner's popping. He's somebody that, you know, is showing up in the optimal at a pretty decent frequency for us. But I question the upside despite what we've kind of seen from him recently.
You know, what's funny is I kind of feel similarly about the Jalen Suggs thing, where it's like, I really think he could benefit from a blowout where we might get Franz Wagner just running a bunch of garbage time out there. And just the price is incorrect. I don't really understand why. So the last handful of games, Wagner, 30 fantasy points, one bad game where he scored 17, but then 31, 28, 31. And he's gone from being priced 5,500 to 4,300. Like, why has he gone down over $1,000 in salary when he scored 28 or more DraftKings points in 4 of his last 5 games? It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Yep. I think the FanDuel price is appropriate. DK's just kind of mispriced them. So for me, I have him projected fairly highly. I think that ownership could use to be higher. But once again, there are still other better, there are still value plays I prefer to him. I'm getting to more of Jalen Suggs, getting more of Kyle Anderson, more Desmond Bane, more of Kevin Huerter, but Wagner's still somebody I'm slightly overweight to the field on. Now, Terry, kicking it back to you for FanDuel, is there anybody that we've not yet mentioned at the forward position that you think is a pretty important play?
Tobias Harris is coming up a pretty good amount for me. Only 7,500 on the FanDuel slate, power forward and small forward eligible, so you get that flexibility out of him. 22.3% optimal. He's negatively leveraged, but it's a negative leverage mark that I'm willing to overcome for a player like him at that price. I think there's certainly plenty for him to do in that offense in a good spot against Portland in one of the nightcaps. They talked about it on the last show. Not a ton of great plays coming from the later games. We do get Lillard and CJ from this game, and I think Harris is the best play on the Philly side. So I'm definitely getting to a fair amount of him despite the negative leverage. One of the better boom score probabilities, one of the better median projections for what I think is a very fair price on the site.
Yep, I think that is all well and good. Now, I'm going to ask a similar question to you, Matt, but first, I want to ask you about a guy on DK who I think is more relevant to the DraftKings slate than the FanDuel slate. And Larry Nance is somebody who I think has a little bit of upside that's kind of getting slept on. He's played a bigger role in the Portland Trailblazers rotation as of late. We do have a sound clip from the coach who's saying that he thinks that Larry Nance settling into his rotation per Chauncey Billups, and that he's somebody that is going to be playing more minutes going forward. Now, you look at the last 3 games for Nance: 20 minutes, 23 minutes, 25 minutes. He's also scored 39 and 23 DraftKings points in his last couple of games. Are you looking at Larry Nance at 3,200 as a good salary saving option on DK? Because he's also somebody I'm getting to at a good clip.
I do have some Larry Nance. I don't have a ton of Larry Nance. It feels a little bit like point chasing to me. You know, like the $3,200 price tag is good, and I can't turn my nose up at 24 minutes, but he's like a point per minute type of guy on his best days, right? Or I shouldn't say that, because he just had a day where he scored 40 in 24 minutes. So on most days, he's going to be a point per minute type of guy at best. So again, he's somebody where I kind of question the upside, but you don't have some of the same ownership concerns that you do with a guy like Wagner. So I definitely have some of Nance built into my lineups. The guy that I want to talk about, we kind of brushed on him, but I'm kind of all in on Josh Hart. You want to talk about a guy whose price has gone down for no reason, right? 38, 36.75, and 43 DraftKings points in his last 3 games. Yet his price has gone down by $300 today. So I'm always interested in Josh Hart when he's going to see minutes. We know about the rebounding ability, right? He's one of the best rebounding guards sort of in the business. You can get him at guard or forward on DraftKings. He's the guy to me that I think has, like, not slate breaking upside, but if he gets you 35 again, that's going to be tough to replicate with some of these other, you know, lower priced forwards that we have on the slate.
Yeah, I have no problem with that shout out whatsoever. I have Hart projected for just over 30 fantasy points, which would be pretty valuable right there at his price point. One more thing I'll add about Nance is it's really just a price point thing for me. And I gave him, I buy into what Chauncey Billups has said. So I gave him 25 minutes today, same as he played last game. if he's actually going to play 25 minutes, like you said, he doesn't have to be the best fantasy producer in the world. If he's playing 25 minutes as a 0.9 points per minute fantasy producer, we're still looking at like 23 fantasy points from a 20 at 3,200 at no ownership. So that's kind of something that appeals to me a little bit here. Let me just see if there's any other forwards I'm getting exposure to we haven't talked about that I want to ask you guys about, but I think we've hit on all of them. So we could bounce.
Can I throw
over.
one more name?
Oh, yeah. Go ahead. Of course.
He's kind of a forward center, so we might have talked about him anyway, but the mayor of Milwaukee, Bobby Portis. He's somebody that's probably going to be pretty optimal on FanDuel today, but I still like him a lot on DraftKings. He's showing up as one of the best leverage plays at 6,700. We haven't projected for less than 5% ownership, but you want to talk about somebody that like we have no concerns about the per minute productivity with. Bobby Portis is that guy, right? You can pretty much pencil him in for a fantasy point per minute with upside for more every single time he takes the court. And as long as Brook Lopez is going to miss time, you can feel pretty good about Portis getting, 30 plus minutes on most slates. So I think Portis is a very interesting pivot from, if you wanted to go with sort of a mid-range option, get away from some of the Giannis's or some of the values, like Portis is a very interesting pivot for me.
Yeah. And like you said, no Brook Lopez. So we could safely assume that Bobby Portis is going to continue to play a healthy amount of minutes. So I think that him is a lower owned option. That makes sense. Sarah, I want to ask you, there is one guy I was going through my ownerships that I'm getting some exposure to that I've been getting a lot of exposure to lately and we haven't brought up yet. And that's Jaren Jackson Jr., who is a guy that has all the talent in the world, but just has some of these games where he comes out on the court and immediately gets into foul trouble. And it's like, oh my God, I played a bunch of Jaren Jackson Jr.'s who played 19 minutes tonight. But when he stays on the court, he's now scored something like 35 or more fantasy points in like 8 of his last 10 games. So the foul troubles have been a little bit under check recently. The ownership isn't really there today, even though we have this injury situation with the Memphis Grizzlies. So I think there is a possibility for him to get a couple extra minutes. Of course, he has to stay out of foul trouble. But is Jaren Jackson Jr. somebody you're looking at for upside at all?
Yeah, a little bit. I wish he was a little bit cheaper than that 72 that we get him at, power forward and center eligible on the FanDuel slate. That price puts him behind some of the other players, right? We're getting, like I said before, I'm getting a decent amount of Al Horford, power forward center. I'm getting a massive amount of Bobby Portis, to Matt's point, power forward center for only 6,000. I mentioned Tobias Harris at 75. So I'm just getting him squeezed a little bit, but I do like the play. I really like the upside. 1.13 fantasy points per minute for the season. And really, I feel like he's a better rebounder than the 9.8% rebounding percentage he's shown so far this season. He was a 1.26 fantasy point per minute across all situations last year. A little bit less usage, a little bit less involvement this season so far. But you mentioned with some absences in that team and, kind of coming into his own, if he stays out of foul trouble, there's massive potential there. So it's definitely somebody I would want to get to and kind of deliberately mix in. He's got a little bit of positive leverage that he's hanging on to. It'll probably even out once we get there and just be like efficient. But if you can get beyond the field's less than 10% ownership, I think it's probably a good upside play there. That's a spot that I like from a little bit further down the board.
All right.
I like that call.
Yeah. Are you getting to Triple J on DK at all?
Yeah, he's even better value. He's 6,400 on DraftKings. And you're right. We're penciling in, Kyle Anderson for all these minutes. But there's a scenario where Josh Jackson gets to 32 or 33 tonight. And if that happens, he can smash this price tag. So when I rerun my lineups here in a few minutes, I'm going to have to bump him up a little bit.
Yeah, that's somebody who the only guy at the forward position that's an important play for me that we had not yet mentioned. By the way, guys, we have 17 minutes to go until the slate locks, but neither of us are going anywhere. All three of us are going to be sticking around 30 minutes after the slate locks. We're going to be talking about prize picks. We're going to be going over some of the top prop plays. We're going to be using the props tool over on Awesemo.com and seeing what looks good, comparing it to prize picks. But that doesn't mean we're only going to be talking about prize picks. Any kind of breaking news that happens, player gets ruled out, weird starting lineup, we'll be breaking that down from a FanDuel and DraftKings perspective as well. So a little bit of information for everybody. But if you are looking to play on prize picks, make your first deposit now using the promo code Awesemo to get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. All right, without further ado, let's head on over to the center position. And starting with you, Terry, I know you said that you like Al Horford a lot today. Is he your most rostered center on FanDuel today?
Good question. I would bet that he is. Yeah, I mean, he was coming up, like I said before, 99% of 250 optimal lineups, just dashing the optimal off the top. So whether it's in the power forward spot or the center spot, because you can flex him around a decent amount on FanDuel, I was getting massive shares of Al Horford here. With Robert Williams out, there's a little bit more for him to do in terms of rebounding. He's a guy who does a little bit of everything anyway. 56.6% true shooting percentage, 18.1% assist share, and 13.6% on the rebounding. It's just a really strong play at the 7,000 price, especially with that ability to move him around. 31.5% optimal rate. I don't really sweat that he's negatively leveraged. He's getting owned by about 40% of the field. I'm happy to go there. I'm happy to get beyond the field. So yeah, whether it's at the power forward or center spot, he is a massive part of lineups for me today.
All right, we just got an ownership update as of 11 seconds ago. So I'm just scrolling through, seeing what some of this looks like, seeing if there's anything that stands out much differently from what we had before. By the way, Al Horford, the most overall roster player on FanDuel right now, he's projected for 43.2% ownership. Over on DraftKings, he's projected for 18.2% ownership. A little bit different of a situation because he's 7,600 over on DK. So, Matt, I'm going to ask you. We've got Terry loves Al Horford over on FanDuel. How do you feel about him on DK at 7,600?
The problem with Big Al here on DraftKings is that Rudy Gobert is only 7,900. So I think Rudy Gobert is going to soak up a lot of the ownership in that range. And maybe that makes Horford a better play, right? Because he's only coming in with projected ownership of about 17.5%, as opposed to whatever he is over on FanDuel. But it's hard to get away from Gobert at sub 8K against the Kings. They struggle defensively. They struggle on the boards. Gobert has been a monster on the boards to start the year. He's leading the league over 15 rebounds per game. So I think he's my top owned center. Again, kind of like Horford is on FanDuel. He's a little bit negatively leveraged, but he's just one of those players that you can feel pretty comfortable penciling in for, 40-ish DraftKings points tonight.
Yeah, and so with Al Horford running my lineups on DK compared to FanDuel, I get to him a lot more on FanDuel than DK, and I do find the price tag also a little bit restrictive on Al Horford, where, I get that he's looking at a bigger role with no Robert Williams in the mix. We've seen Robert Williams out a handful of times, and we've seen solid games from Al Horford as of late at this price point, but not like anything crazy. The last 4 games, 28, 37, 30, 33 fantasy points. I just don't know if he has a significant enough upside at 7,600 for me to want to roster him. That's a pretty steep price. So I only have Al Horford in 5% of my lineups right now on DK. A little bit underweight to the field on him. My overall favorite center on this slate, one of them is Rudy Gobert. He's up there, but my actual favorite center here relative to ownership, and this is going to apply to DK and FanDuel, Terry, it's Clint Capella. And he's somebody this year who has been pretty disappointing. I was high on him coming into the season, having in a bunch of best ball leagues. The minutes weren't there before. Then the minutes started to go up and just the production wasn't quite there. But we've seen now him pretty regularly playing upwards of 34 minutes in competitive games. His price point is way down from last year. What do you think of Clint Capella today? Because I'm still pretty bullish on him going forward.
Yeah, it's funny. He's a little bit down the board in terms of where the overall optimal lineup rate on if you pull up our boom bust tool, but he was coming up a lot for me in crunches. He was coming up a lot for me when I sorted my lineups, and I'm happy about it. And I think it's partly because at 7,000, he's a center only player. So a lot of the other guys that we've talked about have power forward and center eligibility. A lot of those guys were pushing to power forward to make room for him at that excellent price in the center spot. 1.09 fantasy points per minute, 7,000. I'm happy with the 1.09 at that price. Maybe I want a little bit more, but this is a guy who was a 1.35 FanDuel point per minute player across all situations last season on 19.3% usage. The overall usage is down a little bit, 14.8% usage this season, but I just think there's significant upside for a player like Clint Capella at that price. Another guy negatively leveraged, but I think it's a good enough upside play for the money that I, again, don't really care that much about that negative leverage. And there's not a lot of other pure center plays on the FanDuel slate where you don't have that power forward eligibility. Gobert is the other one, but he costs 1,300 more at 8,300. So it's getting to a little bit of Gobert, but by far I prefer the Capella play.
Yeah, and it's once again Clint Capella. He was so good from fantasy perspective last year. I remember last year, Josh Engelman and I did the majority of Live Before Locks together, and people were incensed when we said that Clint Capella was overpriced to like 10,600 on FanDuel. Remember last year's price got crazy expensive after he had a bunch of good games in a row, and people were like, "Oh my God, how could you not play Clint Capella 10,600?" And now he's 7,000, and people really aren't that keen to play him. So Clint Capella is somebody I really like on both FanDuel and DraftKings. Matt, on DK, is Clint Capella somebody that you're getting to? And I know you liked Rudy Gobert a lot, so maybe just you're getting to Gobert in that price range and not really to Capella.
No, I have plenty of Capella too. The thing we've kind of alluded to it is I think you really have to pay attention to what games you want to target this year. Like there are just so many low scoring, boring type of fantasy basketball games that, like in years past, you didn't have to worry about that so much. This year, if you pick the wrong games, you could be looking at a 98-90 type of final. And this game between the Hornets and the Hawks, it stands out as easily the best game on the slate for me. So I have a lot of exposure to that contest. The Hawks, they have tons of viable players on DraftKings. Capella's one of them. We know the guy's ceiling. He has the 55, 60 fantasy point game in his range of outcomes. And the Hornets are the Hornets are a great matchup for that. They're a terrible rebounding team, 25th in rebound rate. They're the worst defensive team in the league. So I think that, again, you can't really go wrong selecting players in that contest.
Yeah, but once again, I like Clint Capella. Rudy Gobert also is one of my most exposed centers today. So my two favorite center plays overall on DK, Clint Capella and Rudy Gobert. Capella a little bit preferred for me, but once again, really strong plays. We do have a super chat here from Malcolm Revamp, who's asking, he said he came in late. Who most owned guard? So who is the I'm going to do you at one up. So he just wants to know who the most owned guard is on both sides. I'll give you the top 5 owned players on both sites today, according to our ownership projections. So starting with DraftKings, I know, Terry, it's a big deal here. We're giving away lots of stuff. The top 5 most owned players on both sites today. On DK, Jalen Suggs, by far the chalk play, 49.7% projected ownership. It's kind of flat beyond him, though. There's not one guy who's crazy owned past him. He's 49.7%. The next most roster player, we're looking at Kyle Anderson, 25.8%. Rudy Gobert, 22.5%. Josh Hart moving up the ownership leaderboard. We got Matt here, just says Josh Hart's name, and all of a sudden everybody's dying to roster Josh Hart, 21.5% projected ownership to Josh Hart. Desmond Bane, 21.4%. Those are the guys on DK. Over on FanDuel, the most owned players, Al Horford, number 1, 43.2%, tied though with Jalen Suggs at 43.2%. And then we've got Patrick Beverley, 35.2%. Never mind. I looked at the number wrong. I was going to say Dennis Schroeder is 35.2% also, but Dennis Schroeder is 33.2%. And we've got Kyle Anderson at 32.9%. So a lot of overlap there, but that's what we're looking at as the most popular plays on the slate today. All right, center plays. Let's look at cheap options, Terry. And I kind of think this is a slate that sets up pretty well to pay up for center at FanDuel. But are there any cheap options at FanDuel center that really stand out to you as being good plays?
So, I mean, we've got those power forward and center flexible guys, right? So Horford is right there, obviously at 7,000. Bobby Portis, who we talked about, at 6,000. These are like mid-range kind of plays. Wendell Carter pops into that range as well. 6,100 on the FanDuel slate, coming up pretty frequently optimal in the boss's projections. I had him down a little bit lower than that, but Alex has him with a nice 31.3 median FanDuel projection. He's a guy 1.06 FanDuel points per minute across all situations. We've talked about this game enough where on the Orlando side, there just might be enough to do where he can have a decent shot at a ceiling score, 23.2% boom score probability. I don't like him as much at negative 8.3 leverage as I'm like willing to not sweat the leverage on some of these other guys. So if I'm taking anybody down just for ownership at that position, it would be him. So maybe he comes out of a few shares, particularly in favor of getting to Clint Capella for only 900 more at the center spot. So if it's a tiebreak there where I've got, let's say, Horford and Portis in the power forwards already, and I'm just looking for a pure center play and I've got that 900 to spend, I'll go to Clint Capella over Wendell Carter every time in that spot.
Yeah, I've gotten to Wendell Carter actually a lot this year. I haven't played him quite as much recently, but early in the year, there was a bunch of slates where, Mo Bamba was projected for all the ownership in the world. And I thought Wendell Carter made for a nice pivot play. And There's just always slates where they both had monster games and they would both end up in the optimal lineup. Now, Matt, I'm going to ask you same question. DK a little bit different because there's a lot of guys that have power forward and center eligibility, and we could play them in the flex spot. So I found a little bit more optimal to play cheap centers over on DK than it is at times on FanDuel today. But are there any cheap center plays that we've not talked about yet today that you really do think stand out on DK?
The only one for me is Steven Adams. He's 4,700. The minutes have kind of been all over the place for Adams this season. If you look at his last handful of games, he's played as many as 36 and a half. He's played as low as 21. I do think that they will kind of need his size in this matchup against Karl Anthony Towns. So I think you can pencil Adams in for, mid 20s, high 20s type minutes. And if he plays that much, I think he has upside at his $4,700 price tag. But other than that, I think that kind of like you said, this is a position where you want to pay up today for the most part. Can you sprinkle in some Grant Williams at 31, some Larry Nance at 32, Brandon Clark maybe at 33? Sure. But I do think you want to pay up for some of these higher price dudes.
All right. And then, Terry, any centers that we've not yet mentioned over on FanDuel that you think the people should be knowing about today?
A guy who's come up a pretty decent amount in chat is Andre Drummond. I keep seeing him mentioned all around. He's not rating out well for us on the site, really. Sub 10% optimal on FanDuel, sub 10% optimal on the DK slate, worse on DK. Fair price, 7,600 for, compared to the price we saw him ascend to over the last couple of weeks. But they were talking about him on the last show. Seems like he's kind of lost his legs with all this action, not really delivering, definitely bumped his head on the price ceiling and has come down. Is he a guy that either of you guys are getting to on either site? Because he does have a decent positive leverage mark, but I wasn't really expecting much from him. I just think he's worth talking about since chat seems so high on him.
I think there's unquestionable upside in Andre Drummond because we've seen it with him as a starter so far. Now, with that said, he's still somewhat expensive, not quite as expensive as he was a few slates ago. And the playing time just isn't there because he sucks. And so the Philadelphia 76ers, there were some games without Joel Embiid where Drummond just played fairly well and they left him out there. And we've just seen him get destroyed in some of these recent games. So he was only on the court for 12 minutes against Utah. Last game against Denver, he was out there for 29 minutes. They limited him a little bit. Partially that was due to blowout, but also it's not like he's playing exceptionally well when he's on the court. So he's a tricky one because he's such a good points per minute fantasy producer and he's so bad in real life that he's on a minimum contract and nobody really wanted him in the offseason, that there's such a wide range of outcomes with his minutes. I'm personally not rostering him today, but if somebody had a small amount of exposure to them in tournaments, I could certainly make a case for there to be upside at him. Matt, where do you stand with Drummond?
Yeah, I'm overweight on Drummond, but it's not hard to be overweight on him when he's projected for less than 5% ownership. This is a guy that we were literally falling all over ourselves to play at 7,800 just a couple weeks ago. So I'm not giving up on him. We know that he's got the upside for, 1.5 fantasy points per minute when he's playing well. So I don't think he needs more than 30 minutes to potentially be a really strong option tonight at 7,800. So I'll have him. But again, center, I'm kind of spread out. I have a lot of Karl Anthony Towns. He's grading out as a very positively leveraged play for us, along with Drummond, along with Bobby Portis, along with Steven Adams. I have a lot of centers tonight. So I wouldn't say that I'm overly exposed to any one player at the position.
All right. We got a super chat here from DFS Reds. This is a DraftKings question. He is asking, which is the better combination? So a 2v2, Matt. One side, D'Angelo Russell and Mo Bamba. The other side, Anthony Edwards and Jaren Jackson Jr. I personally prefer the Edwards and Jackson side. I have more exposure to Edwards than I have to Russell. I have more exposure to Triple J than I do to Bamba. Do you have a lean between Russell and Bamba or Edwards and Jackson?
Yeah, I'm going to take number one.
Right.
I'm sort of in the opposite boat as you. I think I have more Bamba than Triple J at this point, although it's getting closer for me. The fact that you can play Triple J at forward and Bamba's center only is kind of limiting there. But again, for me, it's team DAR over team Anthony Edwards. So
Well, we'll see. At the end of the day, something's going to happen. Either I'm putting a hat on, your hat's coming off. That's how we decide wagers in these parts of the internet. Guys, we only have about 90 seconds left until lock. If you haven't done it already, make sure to get those lineups in. Also, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, but don't go anywhere because we are going to be sticking around for 30 minutes after the slate starts. I've got my second screen set up here now, so I'm able to watch the games as we're going along. Although, if I'm being honest, I'm going to be watching UFC in those last 30 minutes. It's not going to be the NBA games, but I'll try to set up a double screen. I'll see if I get double screen or triple screen, as some people would call it. But also, Terry, I want to really quick bring up Odd Shopper in our props tool because we got a little bit of news that came out. Not significant news for the DFS slate a few minutes ago. And that is that Chris Duarte is going to be coming off the bench. Justin Holiday supplanted him in the starting lineup for the Indiana Pacers. So now, as a result, I look over at Odd Shopper, and we have a bunch of unders that look favorable for Chris Duarte. One that really stands out is under 3.5 rebounds. And I think that's a prop that makes a whole lot of sense now Duarte is coming off the bench instead of starting. I don't think this is a situation where Duarte is getting totally pinched from the rotation, but he probably loses a few minutes to make some of those unders look appealing. How do you feel about Duarte under 3.5 rebounds?
Yeah, I tell you what, I don't hate that at all. In 28.7 minutes per game, that's our projection for tonight. We've got him projected at 28.7. He's playing 30.9 minutes per game, only averaging 4.2 rebounds, a 6.5% rebounding percentage. If we're taking those extra minutes away, that's certainly targetable for going underneath on that rebounding on that rebounding prop. Couldn't finish out my sentence there.
Hey, it's good. It's an hour. We get dry mouth. Things happen. Still 30 minutes left to go, though. And we are at lock, guys. So I'm curious to see what some of these ownerships actually ended up being. We'll get those in a sec. But first, the next 30 minutes of the show, once again, we're going to be talking about some prize picks. If you guys are new to prize picks, they've got prop-based daily fantasy sports contests, and you could sign up right now using the promo code Awesemo to get a $100 bonus on your first deposit. So we're going to be looking at that. Also, let's look at some of the early ownerships and seeing where guys ended up coming out as it comes. Terry, could you pull up FanDuel while I pull up DK? And the contests haven't loaded yet to see where the ownership actually. Oh, there we go. All right.
I'll just look pretty.
Okay. Yeah, you can do that. You could. Matt, why do you think you're here? Do you think we needed a 3-man booth? You're here for the looks. All right. So
the aesthetics, man.
All right, nothing yet. And let me also check, which are these the 7:00 games? Are we going to care about these? I don't remember which order the games are in.
Hey, can I give you Josh Hart FanDuel slate, the big tournament, 48.8% on?
Oh my! Look at you moving the market, Matt LaMarca. You know what that was. You know what that was from. So yeah, the only two games that are starting at the 7 p.m. time, it is the Pacers at home against the Pelicans. We've got those Duarte unders to look at there. And then the Wizards at home against the Heat. So just those two games I'm pulling up. Let's see if we've got DK ownership populating here yet. The app is just spinning in circles for me. So that's usually no good. And there we go. But no ownership showing yet. So we're going to have to wait on that for a second. Let's head on over to prize picks now. I've also got Odd Shopper pulled up. So if you guys are unfamiliar with Odd Shopper, it's a free service that we have over at awesemo.com. Really easy to find from the site. You can either go to www.oddshopper.com or you just go to awesemo.com, top right of the screen, click on it. You'll get directed to Odd Shopper. Really easy way to sort some of the bets there. And for prize picks purposes, I don't care about ROI because there's no VIG on the Odd Shopper bets. I just like to look at the expected win rate, and then we could try to find some of the numbers that really look good on Odd Shopper and compare them to some of the stuff at Prize Picks. So let's look at some of the chalk plays from the slate of games that haven't started yet, because games that have already started, there's no use in us really looking at them. Matt, who are some players that you're interested in talking about? Just any kind of general props, and we'll talk through them. Some of the chalk players from the night slate of games. Who are guys that you want us to look at some props for?
Some chalk players from. Well, let's start with the Celtics guys. We talked about Jason Tatum. We talked about Al Horford. It looks like Marcus Smart is also available on the on Prize Picks. Let's dive into some of those.
Okay, I think that's a good call. And, let's make Terry answer to Al Horford. And first thing that I see here, Al Horford, 14.5 points is his over on Prize Picks. Terry, we know that you were pretty big on Al Horford today, but 14.5 points. How do you feel about that number on Prize Picks? Is that something you were projecting over or under? You could fill up the box score in a number of ways, so it might not just be points he gets there by.
Yeah, that's one where I prefer Al Horford from a DFS perspective, where he can rack up some additional scoring with some assists, some rebounds, and everything that he does out there. Looking at Alex's projection, he's got him at 14.59 real life points. I had him slightly under that mark, so Alex has him going under 49% of the time. So if I was using my projection, we'd be even further under that. So I like the under on that one. But at 49, we're talking about basically a coin flip in terms of the probability. So it's not one that I think I would book in Prize Picks. It's not one I think I would really go to for a bet, but I do like it to trend under. But it's a pretty efficient line at 14.5.
All right. So I think I've got one that I could interest you in with Al Horford. If you check out the fantasy points, and by the way, if you guys aren't familiar with the fantasy scoring over at Prize Picks, it's the same as FanDuel. So if you're using the tools over at Awesemo.com, you can check out the FanDuel projections and compare that to the fantasy point lines. And that's a good way to go out and find some value. Now, Terry, I'm going to assume you're going to be over on this Al Horford number. Fantasy points on Al Horford over under 33. Is that a number that's a little more appealing to you?
Oh yeah, we're soaring over that one. I've got him. Actually, Alex and I are separated by 0.0293 FanDuel points. We both got him for 38.3. I've got him at 38.33. Alex has him dead at 38.3. Although it's only 1 decimal point, so maybe it's exactly the same. But yeah, I like that one a lot. Definitely can smash that one. I don't have the probability on it in front of me. We only have the points, rebounds, and assists on the prop tool here, so we'll fly without probability. But with 5 points clearance, I'm comfortable doing that and saying the over.
Yep, I'm a good amount over as well. And then once again, it's the difference between DK and FanDuel, where FanDuel, I thought, much easier play to get to at his price point over on DK, where he's 7,600. I haven't projected for 37.5 fantasy points or something like that over on DK. Didn't make him the best play in the world at 7,600, but once again, it's still well over what he is at over on Prize Picks. Let's look at some Jason Tatum props, and I'm going to throw this to you, Matt. You were the one who brought up Jason Tatum, so now you're going to have to answer to it. So Jason Tatum's fantasy points, 45.5. That looks like a pretty efficient number to me. Let's look at his points, 25.5. Rebounds for Jason Tatum, 8. Are there any individual props you see with Tatum? Either the points I just brought up, the rebounds at 8, 25.5 points, any of that look appealing to you, or do you think it's all about efficient?
Yeah, so the scoring prop is interesting, right? Because it's kind of come down, or at least it's lower than what we have in our prop tool. We have his scoring prop at 27.5. So we haven't projected for about 26 points. So there's not a ton of value with the current number over on Prize Picks, unfortunately. But it is interesting to think about the fact that that total is like, normally these are pretty much in sync. So that's clearly had some movement. I'm just kind of meh on that whole game. Like the Thunder are kind of a team where you got to worry about the blowout. They actually are decent defensively. It's got the lowest total on the slate at 205.5 points. So my natural inclination is just to take unders on most of these Celtics props. But, the Horford fantasy one did sound pretty good. And I don't see a ton of value on either side of Tatum 25.5. So yeah, long roundabout way of saying pass.
You mentioned their defensive acumen. Is this one when we're considering player props? Do you guys consider the specific one-on-one defensive matchup a little bit more than we necessarily do for DFS? Like it's something I don't really factor in for DFS, but no.
No, same as when we talk about a lot of NFL stuff, because we just don't know. We don't know whose minutes are going to overlap with whose. We don't know who's going to be covering who. And there could be a time, and it's something also, it's much more prevalent in NFL DFS, where somebody say, I'm not rostering this wide receiver because he's going to be covered by this cornerback. And then all of a sudden he catches a 70-yard touchdown pass being covered by a different cornerback. So yeah, it's so hard to predict. And then also that guys don't play all 48 minutes. So there's going to be times where they're matched up against other players. So,
and they're switching. And I find it even less like predicative in NBA DFS, because like, in the NFL, you at least have like sides, right? If you have a wide receiver who plays on one side, you have a cornerback who plays on that side primarily, like at least you can kind of handicap the number of possessions that or plays that you think they're going to run against each other. Yeah. In the NBA, who knows? You might get guys in foul trouble. You're going to have switches. You're going to have, all sorts of different types of chicanery, zone defenses occasionally. Like it's to me, projecting matchups in NBA is just a fool's errand.
Yeah, I agree with you there. And the other thing also is NBA is such a team defense sport where we could account pretty well for defense just based on team defense. And then you just kind of find out like, hey, this team against small forwards allows the small forwards against them, the rebound rate goes down by 3.8%. This team against centers, their centers score 2.6 more percentage points against them on average. That's how I balance my personal stuff in terms of player versus possession. It's not against the individual matchup. It's just based on what the team defense is. Where it gets really tricky for NBA, though, is when an opposing center is ruled out, who's actually important. So something that totally messes me up that I've brought up a bunch of times on the channel that I've never figured out the right way to adjust for is the 76ers are playing against the Celtics and Joel Embiid gets ruled out right before lock. That has a significant impact on the 76ers team defense going from Joel Embiid to Andre Drummond. So I just give a flat bump to everybody. I don't know the exact scientific way to do it, but I spent a lot of time thinking about that. And we did get other news here. This is news that was not unexpected. Dylan Brooks officially out today. So that Grizzlies value, which we knew was coming, but we had Dylan Brooks was doubtful. Now he's officially out. Let's look at some of the prize picks props for guys like Desmond Bane and Kyle Anderson. They both have fantasy point props over on prize picks. And Terry, I'm going to ask you about Desmond Bane first. Then Matt, I'm going to ask you about Kyle Anderson. Matt liked Kyle Anderson a little bit more earlier in the day when we were talking about guards, way back then. That was like an hour ago. But Terry, Desmond Bane over under 25 fantasy points. Dylan Brooks officially out. Do you have him projected above or below that number?
Boy, that's efficient. I got him at 25.59 as of last time I updated my sheet that has both numbers on it. Alex had him at 24.8. So if you want to ride with me, we're going slightly over. If you want to ride with the boss, the best player in the world, you're going slightly under. I would probably lean Alex's way. And since it's so efficient, it's just another one that I don't think I'd really tangle with. I think I would just kind of leave that one alone. That said, maybe it trickled up by a couple of points with the confirmed news for his fellow members of the Grizz out tonight. So maybe you get him squeaking by 2-3 points, but I don't love it.
All right. And then, Matt, I'm going to ask you, Dylan Brooks officially out. Kyle Anderson, his over-under, the same exact number as Desmond Bane, 25 fantasy points. Do you like the over, the under on that number? I also lean towards the over there.
I'm going over, baby. And the thing that you got to love about Anderson is he can rack up points in a variety of different ways. And that's why I would lean towards his fantasy prop as opposed to like a scoring prop or a rebounding prop, because you never know with him. He might have a 10 assist game. He might have a double-digit rebound game. Maybe he'll even score double-digit points. You never know.
Maybe.
Maybe. So I like 25 for him. I think he goes over that in a nice matchup here versus the Timberwolves. It's a game that, again, like I think that this is one of the games we want to target tonight. In DFS, and that also means overs potentially in the prop market.
By the way, because people were asking about it in YouTube chat, we don't have an official starting lineup for the Memphis Grizzlies. My assumption, though, Morant, Bane, Anderson, Jaren Jackson Jr., Steven Adams, that is what I am assuming. If we get something different where Kyle Anderson doesn't start, then I'm going to have to adjust how I look at him right now. Although I didn't give him a massive amount of minutes. I have him for 28 minutes right now as a starter. Still makes some really good value play. Terry, I'm going to ask you, do you know how many minutes we have projected Kyle Anderson for? And if he does come off the bench, would you feel different about him on FanDuel today?
It would be maybe a slight ding. We had him, as of my last update, 28.7 minutes. So it's right around, what your expectation is. If you get him at 26 minutes, 24 minutes coming off the bench, yeah, it takes a little bit of a haircut, but I think the value is still there, particularly on DK at 46. I think you still retain the value. On FanDuel, 53, it becomes a little bit more challenging with some reasonably comparable value plays, particularly at the power forward spot. You still might slot him in a little bit to the small forward, but I think he would drop a little bit, become more comparable with like Josh Hart for 100 more. I think that catches up and closes the gap that we see in their optimal lineups rates that we had earlier.
The uber chalky now.
Josh Hart.
Yeah,
41.6% ownership. I'm saying.
Oh, I didn't look at it. And by the way, has the game started? Do we have points yet? Oh, all right. Look out, guys. We're a minute and 40 seconds into the first game, which is everybody knows in DFS. This is where all tournaments are decided. That first minute and 40 seconds. That's where you start tilting and sweating at this point in the game. So Josh Hart, bad news. Negative 0.5 fantasy points. He has done nothing but turn the ball over once. He's dead. He's on the list, guys. That's what the people say. The
This
big
is where
fan.
Dexter used to clean up.
Yeah,
Remember Dexter?
It was for Josh Hart, just for guys like Josh Hart who don't produce fantasy points the first minute 40 seconds of the game. The big fantasy producer so far, Miles Turner, 3 points and a rebound, just crushing the slate right out of the gate. 3 points and rebound for Miles Turner. Now getting back to slate breaker, it's over. The slate's already been decided. Getting back to prize picks now. The real chalk of the slate, we don't have the ownership on them yet. The game starts in 26 minutes. So just as we're wrapping up this show, is when this guy's game is going to start. Jalen Suggs projected for massive ownership on both DraftKings and FanDuel today. Now, I'm going to ask both of you guys about him, but starting with Matt, Jalen Suggs over under 13.5 points over on prize picks, going up against the tough Bucks defense, but potential for a blowout. We've got Cole Anthony out, a lot of moving parts here. Matt, how do you feel about over under 13.5 Jalen Suggs real life points?
I will take the over there. We have that one actually grading out pretty favorably last I saw in the player prop tool. We haven't projected or Alex hasn't projected right around 16 points. He had 17 in a quarter yesterday versus Brooklyn. So I don't think asking him to score 14 in a game is too much. I will take the over there. You can take over 25 fantasy points as well. I think that's fair too. But yeah, the scoring prop, we have that as one of the best of the day in the old player prop tool.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to like about Jalen Suggs. Another one that I like, Terry, and this could be actually my favorite prop all on prize picks, is if you look at the fantasy points, Jalen Suggs is over under 25 fantasy points on prize picks. That looks like a pretty appealing play, but we know Terry, he's been a little soft in the show. He's not making any stands like Matt and I would like him to make. But Jalen Suggs, 25 fantasy points, Terry. Surely you got to like the over there, right?
Oh, that's a hill we can definitely plant our flag on, no doubt about it. That's coming up. That is very strong on both Alex's projection. Now looks like Alex has him 29.2 as of my last update. I had him at 29.16. So another one, me and the boss separated by 0.03764 fantasy points. Love that one. Anytime you can get 4 points clearance on something like that, that's definitely a smash spot.
I like everybody in the YouTube chat who have found out how to call for Nightbot with the different different signals in YouTube chats. We just got people who are alerting who are using the exclamation mark prize picks to make Nightbot come up and tell everybody they get a $100 deposit bonus by using the promo code Awesemo. So there we go. You guys really could put Nightbot in some trouble there if you just spam him, make him keep tweeting or messaging promos, which I'm sure everybody would be thrilled about. Because one thing I found about doing shows on YouTube, the people love when you do promos and ad reads. It's their favorite thing ever. I think that's most of the reason. It's the reason they show up, is to listen to me tell them about products and what kind of deals we have going on over at Awesemo. Terry, let's talk about prize picks here, and no real NBA news going on right now. We've got, the first games of the slate are about halfway through the first quarter. By the way, Pacers up 15-4 on the Pelicans. Josh Hart halfway through the first quarter still sitting at negative 0.5 DK fantasy points. So are you sweating yet, Matt?
Yes, I am sweating. I'm officially sweating. Especially since I have single-handedly pushed the DFS community to 40% Josh Hart ownership. It's rough in these streets right now, but I have faith that Josh will come through for us.
Yeah, it's still a little bit of time left, but once again, this first half of first quarter, this is where the buttholes start to clench a little bit. Terry, let's talk about some prize picks here. Who are some players that look really good in the player props tool over at oddshopper.com? Tell me which bets have the highest expected win rate, and we'll compare them to what's over at prize picks.
Yeah, so let's jump over. Why not pull up, let's say the assists board here, and we can look at the assists. Very nice rate on Drew Holiday, sitting at a 6.5 prop. I won't give away whether it's the over or the under, because I'm curious to see where you guys think it'll come in, but it's at a 78% expected win rate with a 6.5 line. Do you guys think that's the under or the over?
For which player?
Drew Holiday.
Well, I could tell you I've been higher on Drew Holiday than Alex for basically every slate for the last 2 weeks now. So I am going to be on the opposite side of this one than whatever Alex has. I have it as a neutral play. I'm right around the same number as the books. I have him for 6.4 assists. But I know that our projections have been lower on Drew Holiday than I have been recently. Terry, am I safe to assume that we prefer the under there?
Yeah, that pattern has held. We have him at a 5.19 projection, coming in 78% of the time, hitting the under on the 6.5 line. So an aggressive difference there.
I will say this. One thing that I think makes a little bit of sense to do with Prize Picks, and you could do it with if you're going to a sports book and get single game parlays. The spread for this game is, let's see, is it changed at all? It is now 11.5 points. It was actually 12 a little bit earlier. But I do think there's a little bit of logic to parlaying some players from the same games and taking unders from here. And then you just get to a situation, let's say it's a blowout. The Magic end up losing to the Bucks by 25, 30 points. Not totally crazy to think that happens. Then all of a sudden you just get all the unders hit at the same time. I think there's a little bit of correlation there. Matt, is that a strategy that for Prize Picks or just looking at sports books that you think would make sense?
I mean, I'm all about making correlated bets. If you want to play the correlated blowout angle, that's fine. But like, I love doing it just with regular scoring props, right? Like, for example, if you think that Damian Lillard is going to hit the over on his prop, I'm not saying that he is, I'm just using that as an example. But if you think that's going to happen, there's a better chance than not that CJ McCollum is going to hit the under on his. They're two negatively correlated players. When one does well, the other does poorly. So building bets where, you know, if you're right on one, you're going to be right on the other. It's just a smart thing to do.
So from that perspective, with that Orlando-Milwaukee game, if you're looking to walk down that road where you're pairing a few of the Milwaukee guys and the under, thinking that they're going to get that blowout, they're not going to play the fourth quarter with some of those guys like Drew and like Giannis, would you still look to a guy like Suggs, who we talked about, even in a blowout, that might be better? They just give him run as a kid. They want to get him NBA time. Is that still where we were looking at a 68% probable on hitting the over on his 13.5 points line? Is that one where you'd still include the over of him with the under from the other guys and take the correlation maybe a step further?
I don't know it necessarily correlates that heavily. I would just bet the over on Jalen Suggs because I think it's a good number anyway. So you just include that in a parlay, but I don't know that it correlates quite as strong as the other guys. What were you going to say, Matt? Sorry.
No, I was going to say I would be less inclined to use the Suggs over if I was building the blowout narrative.
Makes sense.
Do you think he play? I think he's going to play garbage time today. If the game gets there, do you think he would be playing in garbage time?
You know, I would have to imagine he takes a slight dip in minutes. I just think that it's unnecessarily risky to build it in that way. Like you have 100 million bajillion props to choose from. You know, I know it's grading out well, but there are other props that are grading out just as well, if not better, that are not correlated to that game. So I would just use that in a separate parlay as opposed to one where I was playing the blowout narrative.
All right. I think that does make some sense as well. Although with that said, in general, I just kind of like the overs for Jalen Suggs today anyway.
Agreed.
Yeah. And guys, do us a favor. We're sitting around here. We're hanging out, talking about Prize Picks 30 minutes after the slate lock. Do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. And now let's get a little Josh Hart update and we'll see how he's going. All right. Josh Hart now.
That one.
Ooh. So we're still negative 0.5 fantasy points for Josh Hart. The Pacers are up 17-6. Pelicans have got absolutely nothing going. We've got under pressure productions. He's saying put Matt LaMarca on the plank. We've got other guys want you to break out the sacks on the show. Your confidence level, scale of 1 to 10, Matt. Does Josh Hart turn it around today? Scale of 1 to 10, where are you at?
We're trending down for sure. I mean,
another turnover, I've been told.
7 minutes. Oh, boy.
That's 2 at least.
Oh, he does have a block though. Now I'm seeing.
Oh, okay.
Turning around.
I've got it at a 5 that he turns it around.
Okay. If we finish this show and he is at 0 or negative FanDuel points, will you take your hat off?
Sure. I'll take it off right now. Why not?
Oh my God. Look at this guy here.
No, I gotta give him something. I gotta give him something to win.
You gotta tease a little bit. We gotta tell people to like the video and subscribe and whatnot. before we act. Josh Okogie just ruled out. Nobody really cares. 21-6 is the score. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe there's been a stat correction, and Josh Hart has lost his block. He no longer
Damn it,
has
Josh Hart. Damn you.
He unblocked a shot. It went to did it go to somebody else? Let's see. Does somebody else have a block now? No. I guess they just wiped that off the board. So listen, he's fighting an uphill battle to finish the first quarter with positive fantasy points. Let me go over to the instead of trolling Matt, let's go over to the Wizards Heat game.
Can I just throw out a prop first? Let's throw out a prop.
Yeah, go for it. You can throw out a prop.
I really like Rudy Gobert over 13.5 rebounds. His numbers have been down a bit recently, right? In 3 of his last 4 games, 13 boards or less. But those games weren't against the Kings. I think he does some work tonight against the Kings. He's still averaging over 15 boards on the season. So this number, while it's humongous on the surface, right? 13.5, it's very reasonable for Gobert. So I think considering the matchup, I like that one quite a bit. Alex has him projected for over 14 boards. So I think that the over on that one is a nice play.
I've been crazy high on rebounds for Rudy Gobert. I've been projected for about 16.5. And this matchup against the Kings, you know what the Kings do a lot? Miss shots, and they play at a fairly fast pace. Those are all things that are pretty favorable for Rudy Gobert. Actually, if I pull up, let me see if I could find it. I believe the Kings have rebound rate. I think they allow the most rebounds to opposing centers of any team in the league, which makes sense due to their pace of play. They suck at rebounding. They miss a lot of shots. We've got, let's see, I can't pull up the numbers right now, not enough time, but that aside, I think this is a really good spot to get to Rudy Gobert's rebounds. I have no issue with that whatsoever. Terry, how many rebounds do you have Gobert projected for today?
I was around Alex's number the last I saw, so I'm going to say that I am also pretty high on that one. Just looking at, I was on a different tab here, so I was just looking at his rebounding percentage for the season, 23.7% rebounding percentage. Like Matt said, 15.1 rebounds a game in 30.8 minutes. We've got him projected for an additional minute and change, and I think it's certainly viable that he grabs that extra rebound for us there. So, yeah, I like that quite a bit.
All right. And by the way, people in the YouTube chat, they are all excited about the players that they've played or faded already, which is definitely the way to go halfway through a little more than halfway through the first quarter. We've got news, by the way. Josh Hart was credited with a different block. So Josh Hart is on the board. He has 2 points, a block, 2 turnovers, which means that Matt LaMarca will be allowed to keep his hat and he could still be wearing his shirt at the end of the night. So a little bit of something for everybody. 5 minutes left to go here. And I want to ask you guys before we really finish up, who are the players that are going to make or break your night? And we'll save guys who've not started. I don't want to throw the Josh Hart business on Matt LaMarca anymore. Yeah, we're not going to go down that route. But Terry, of the players who have not started yet, who's most pivotal to your lineups tonight?
Let me scroll over here to where all of my percentages are. One guy that we talked about that I don't think I have very many shares of, if any at all, and I'm a little bit worried just from his points per minute and the fact that he's going to be on the court for probably 28-ish minutes, is Andre Drummond at the center spot. It looks like I do have 2% of him, so not a lot. I know Matt mentioned he was over the 5%. Looks like I undercut that one. That's a guy from a point per minute perspective that I'm nervous about. I've got the massive share of Al Horford. I've got a pretty large share of Jalen Suggs. Kyle Anderson is a guy who is definitely going to be a make or break guy for me overall. So hopefully he's in that starting lineup and we get the full complement of minutes that we're expecting for him, because I have a pretty large share of him and not an easy piece to move around based on how these lineups are built.
Yeah, I would say Jalen Suggs is an obvious answer, except, I mean, we're all rostering a whole bunch of Jalen Suggs. So, if he does well, he does poorly. I don't really think it's going to differentiate my lineups too much from the field. For me, I'm going to say Jaren Jackson Jr. I talked about him a little bit before. I ended up getting to a fair amount of him, particularly on DK at 6,400. And if he goes out and picks up 3 personal fouls in 6 minutes, I could absolutely see that being within the realm of possibility. One thing that is nice, though, that I mentioned before, he has done a little bit better with the fouls as of late, and he's been blocking a ton of shots. We have seen him with multiple blocks in every game since November 1st. So Jaren Jackson Jr., do us a favor. Don't go be fouling anybody, and we should be looking good tonight. But that's the thing that I'm going to be sweating the most. Now, Matt, of a player whose game has not started yet, who's going to make or break your slate?
It could be Giannis, if I'm being completely honest. That rhymed, and I didn't even try it. if Giannis checks in with like significantly higher ownership than what we're projecting at the moment, which is possible, right? Giannis is Giannis. It wouldn't shock me if the field just decided I'm jamming him in. If he's higher owned than 20-ish%, I could be in trouble if he has a 70 game, because most of my lineups are built around the fact that I think guys like Melo and Morant and Towns can put up equivalent ceiling games, right? If I'm banking on those guys hitting 60 as opposed to Giannis hitting 70. That's kind of the way I constructed my lineups tonight. So if Giannis goes out and he has, the 75-point game, I could be in a little bit of trouble.
All right, guys, we're almost done here. Do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, but I would be remiss if I did not end the show like this. Matt, give me the exact number. How many DraftKings fantasy points will Josh Hart finish tonight's game with?
Well, I got to come down now. I initially, if you had asked me this before we started, I would have said 32. I'm now down to 27. He still returns value for us, but it's not going to be a smash. Sorry, everybody.
All right, so at 27, that is going to be Matt's official prediction. You guys could hold him to that. If Matt does not get exactly 27 fantasy points out of Josh Hart, he's going to be walking the plank the next time I do a show with him. Guys, thank you very much for sticking around and hanging out with us tonight. If you haven't done so already, hit that like button on the way out, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and good luck today.